Hey there, tonight we're exploring a Victorian Christmas in London, where the festive lights glowed through thick, suffocating fog, and the workhouses buzzed with stories the holiday cards never told. What you're about to discover is how the spirit of the season flickered resiliently amidst hardship and hope. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. If you think about Christmas in Victorian London, you might conjure up images of rosy-cheeked carolers, horse-drawn carriages, and twinkling gas lamps casting a cozy glow on snowy cobblestones. But hold your reindeer, this isn't just a Christmas card come to life. Beneath the fairy tale facade, there was a reality as foggy as London's notorious pea-soupers. Yes, Charles Dickens gave us some of the most heartwarming Christmas tales, but he also penned A Christmas Carol with an eye on the less-than-jolly conditions of his day. Let's kick things off with Queen Victoria, the monarch who reigned over the United Kingdom from 1837 to 1901. She's often credited, or blamed, depending on your perspective, for popularizing the Christmas traditions we cling to like a toddler to a candy cane. When Victoria married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, a German prince, in 1840, a cross-cultural exchange of festive customs ensued. Albert, bless his German heart, brought over the Christmas tree, a tradition that had been quietly flourishing in Germany since the 16th century. By 1848, the Illustrated London News published a drawing of the royal family gathered around their Christmas tree at Windsor Castle. And just like that, every self-respecting Victorian household wanted one too. It was like the Victorian equivalent of going viral. Now, before you get swept away by the romance of it all, let's zoom out to see the broader picture. The Victorian era wasn't exactly a Dickensian utopia. London was a city of stark contrasts, where the gap between the wealthy and the destitute was as wide as the Thames. This was the era of workhouses, grim institutions where the poorest of the poor were sent to toil in exchange for meager sustenance. Let's just say, if you're imagining a Victorian Christmas as an endless feast of figgy pudding, you might want to adjust your expectations. For the impoverished, Christmas was more about surviving than celebrating. Speaking of Dickens, mister, God bless us, everyone himself, his stories weren't just cozy fireside tales. They were social commentaries, illuminated by the flickering light of compassion and irony. His portrayal of Ebenezer Scrooge, the ultimate miser, was a reflection of the societal neglect of the poor. Dickens had a knack for wrapping his social critiques in heartwarming narratives, like a bitter pill coated in sugar, and it worked. A Christmas Carol, published in 1843, sold out its first print run in just 6 days. Imagine that, 15 shillings and a dose of moral enlightenment for the Victorian reader. But let's not pretend that Dickens single-handedly invented Christmas cheer. The Victorians were already big fans of a good shindig. The Industrial Revolution had shifted the social landscape, and with it, the nature of Christmas festivities. By the 19th century, the holiday had transformed from a rowdy 12-day festival to a more family-centered affair, complete with gift-giving and festive meals. This shift was partly due to the changing workforce. As people moved from farms to factories, long holidays were cut short, and Christmas Day became the main event. Now, as charming as this all sounds, we have to talk about the weather. London's famous fog wasn't just a quaint atmospheric flourish, it was a filthy, choking reality. Coal fires kept homes warm, but also spewed sooty smoke into the air, mixing with the natural mist to create a smog dense enough to cut with a knife. Imagine trying to make merry while the air itself seemed determined to smother you. Yet, the Victorians managed to find joy amidst the murk, lighting up their homes with candles, and eventually, the newfangled gas lights. Despite the soot and the suffering, Victorian London was aglow with festive lights, both literal and metaphorical. The well-heeled might have enjoyed lavish Christmas feasts, complete with roast beef and plum pudding, but for many, the holiday was a time of charity. The well-to-do often distributed food and gifts to the less fortunate, embodying the spirit of goodwill that Dickens so eloquently championed. It was a curious mix of altruism and obligation, a reminder that beneath the veneer of Victorian propriety lay a society grappling with its conscience. As we delve deeper into this story, remember that the Victorians were masters of contradiction. They adored the idea of Christmas as a time of warmth and family, yet many of them lived in cold, cramped conditions. They cherished the notion of festive generosity while navigating a world rife with inequality. So as we unwrap this tale of Victorian Christmas, keep in mind that the history of the season is as layered as a plum pudding, filled with both sweet and savory morsels. So, with a Victorian Christmas as layered as a plum pudding, let's peel back another layer and get to the heart of the matter, the workhouses. These weren't the cozy gingerbread cottages of festive folklore, but rather the grim, institutional forebears of modern welfare. Picture a place where the phrase, "deck the halls," would be met with a bewildered stare. Workhouses were designed to be as unappealing as a wet sock, intended to deter all but the most desperate from seeking refuge within their walls. And believe me, desperate they were. Now, before you start imagining Oliver Twist with his empty bowl, let's ground this in reality. By the mid-19th century, London had over 20 workhouses, each a monument to the era's brutal social policies. They were part of the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, a piece of legislation as popular as a lump of coal in a Christmas stocking. The act aimed to reduce the cost of poor relief by discouraging reliance on public assistance. How? By making the conditions inside workhouses so dismal that only those with no other options would endure them. Victorian mantra might as well have been, work hard or work here. Life inside these institutions was a Dickensian nightmare come to life. Residents, known quaintly as inmates, were stripped of their dignity, their freedoms, and often their families. It was a place where Christmas cheer was about as scarce as a snowball in July. Men, women, and children were separated and forbidden from speaking to each other. Consider it an early version of social distancing, minus the pandemic. Daily routines were governed by a strict timetable, with everyone rising at 5 a.m. in the winter months. Breakfast was a meager affair, typically consisting of gruel or bread, as nourishing as it was appetizing. By the time lunch rolled around, the menu didn't improve much. If you were lucky, you might get a thin broth with a few stray vegetables swimming in it, or the infamous workhouse staple, lobscouse, a nondescript stew that even the most adventurous food bloggers would avoid. For dinner, more bread and cheese, if you were particularly fortunate. All this for a hard day's work, which often involved back-breaking labor like stone breaking or oakum picking, unraveling old rope fibers to be reused, a task as tedious as watching paint dry. Now, let's talk numbers because, after all, the devil is in the details. By 1840, over 200,000 people found themselves living in these institutions across the UK, with thousands more hovering just above the poverty line. It was a system that didn't just fail to lift people out of poverty, it entrenched them in it. The cost of maintaining an inmate was roughly £12 a year, a paltry sum even then, reflecting how little was actually spent on their welfare. Compare that to the lavish Christmas banquets hosted by the wealthy, where a single turkey could cost several shillings, and the disparity becomes as glaring as the gas lamps lining the affluent streets. Of course, not everyone was content to accept this grim status quo. Social reformers like Charles Dickens and Henry Mayhew, wielding their pens like swords, shone a spotlight on the appalling conditions within these institutions. Their work was a wake-up call to the Victorian conscience, much like a cold splash of water to the face. Dickens, through his novels and public speaking, campaigned tirelessly for change, using his unmatched ability to tug at the heartstrings and prod at the nation's moral compass. Meanwhile, Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor offered a detailed, unflinching look at the lives of the city's underclass, laying bare the harsh realities that polite society preferred to ignore. It's important to remember that while the workhouse system was designed to be a last resort, it was also a lifeline for those with nowhere else to turn. For the destitute, it was a choice between starvation on the streets and survival within its walls, a choice akin to being caught between the Scylla and Charybdis of ancient myth. And even during Christmas, a time supposedly brimming with goodwill, the workhouse remained a place of stark contrasts. While the outside world celebrated with eggnog and evergreen boughs inside, any attempt at festivity was a mere flicker of light in an otherwise dark and drab existence. The moral here: Victorian Christmas might have been a picture of warmth and generosity on the surface, but peel back the tinsel and you'll find a society grappling with the very real issues of inequality and poverty. The workhouses were a testament to the era's complex social fabric, where charity and cruelty coexisted like uneasy neighbors. And as much as we'd like to believe in the romanticized version of Christmas past, it's crucial to acknowledge the harsh truths lurking beneath the snow-dusted veneer. After all, history isn't just about what happened. It's about understanding why it mattered. And in the case of Victorian workhouses, it mattered a great deal. As we peer through the smoke and mirrors of Victorian Christmas, let's turn our gaze to the atmospheric phenomenon that was both the city's trademark and its nemesis, the infamous London fog. Now, when you hear fog, you might think of a gently rolling mist, picturesque and mysterious. But London's fog was about as romantic as a wet handshake. This wasn't just any fog. It was a thick, soupy concoction of industrial pollution and natural mist, earning the nickname pea souper for its color and consistency. Think of it less as ambience and more like a health hazard with a side of existential dread. The Victorian era was a time when coal was king. Homes were heated with coal fires, and factories belched smoke like dragons with indigestion. All this soot mixed with the natural moisture in the air to create a fog so dense, you could practically scoop it up and spread it on toast. While Dickens might have described the fog with poetic flair, calling it a great, greasy river, the reality was more suffocating than sublime. It was an era when the air quality was measured by how many feet you could see in front of you. Spoiler alert, not many. This brings us to the Great Smog of 1873, a nasty piece of work even by Victorian standards. While fog was a common occurrence, this particular event was something special, like an unwanted gift that keeps on giving. The smog settled over London for several days, cloaking the city in darkness and causing chaos in its wake. It was like nature had decided to put the city on a timeout, and the consequences were anything but festive. The smog's impact on health was as grim as you'd expect from air you could chew. Respiratory illnesses skyrocketed, with hospitals overwhelmed by patients wheezing and coughing their way through the haze. At a time when medical knowledge was just beginning to understand germs, the fog was seen as a miasma, a foul vapor that could seep into your very being. And while Victorians were nothing if not resilient, the smog was a bitter reminder that nature didn't care much for human convenience or Christmas cheer. The numbers speak for themselves. During the 1873 smog, mortality rates spiked, with thousands succumbing to the toxic air. It was an environmental disaster that highlighted the era's reliance on coal and the lack of understanding about the consequences of industrialization. Yet, the fog was also a symbol of the city's bustling progress, a paradoxical blend of pride and peril. London was the world's largest city at the time, with over 3 million inhabitants by mid-century, and with that growth came challenges that were as vast as the city itself. Amidst this murky backdrop, the Victorians still managed to cling to their holiday traditions like a lifeline. Christmas remained a beacon of warmth in a cold, smoggy world. Gas lamps, despite their contribution to the fog, illuminated the streets with a warm glow, casting long shadows on the cobblestones and creating a cozy ambience that belied the harshness of the air. For those who could afford it, the holiday was a chance to retreat indoors, away from the pea soupers, and indulge in the comforts of home, a roaring fire, a hearty meal, and the company of family. But let's not forget the darker side of this Dickensian tapestry. For the working class, the fog was another layer of hardship piled onto an already heavy load. Navigating the city streets was a challenge, and the risk of accidents was ever present. Imagine trying to make your way through a city where the only thing more common than fog was poverty. The Victorians might have romanticized the fog in literature, but in reality, it was a menace that underscored the era's social inequalities. The fog wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a catalyst for change. As awareness of its dangers grew, so did the calls for reform. The late 19th century saw the beginnings of environmental consciousness, with scientists and reformers advocating for cleaner air and better public health policies. It was a slow process, like trying to clear the fog with a handheld fan, but it laid the groundwork for future generations to tackle the environmental challenges that still haunt us today. So, While the image of a fog-shrouded London may have a certain Gothic charm, it's essential to recognize the harsh realities that lay beneath the surface. The pea soupers were a symptom of an industrial age grappling with its own success, a reminder that progress often comes at a cost. And as we delve deeper into the Victorian Christmas experience, remember that beneath the twinkling lights and festive gatherings, there was a city struggling to breathe amidst its own ambitions. As we wrap up this chapter of our Victorian tale, let's leave the fog behind and look forward to brighter horizons. The story of Christmas in the 19th century is far from over, and there's much more to uncover as we continue our journey through the misty streets of London. So, take a deep breath, preferably of clean air, and prepare for the next adventure in our historical exploration. As we step out of the smog and into the twinkling lights of Victorian Christmas, let's shine a spotlight on the glow that sparked hope amid the soot and hardship, the miraculous arrival of gaslighting. Now, before you start thinking we're talking about the psychological manipulation term, let's clarify. This gaslighting was literal. It was the 19th century version of flipping the switch, casting a warm, flickering glow across the cobbled streets and into the hearts of Londoners. Gaslighting was a game changer, the kind that made people marvel as if they'd just discovered a unicorn grazing in Trafalgar Square. Introduced in London around 1807, by the time Queen Victoria was donning her crown, gaslights were illuminating the city like never before. It was like giving the city a new set of eyes, piercing through the murky fog and making winter nights a little less daunting. This wasn't just a technological marvel, it was a social revolution. Picture this, a bustling commercial Christmas market, the kind that makes today's holiday bazaars look like amateur hour. By the late 1800s, these markets were popping up like mushrooms after rain, each stall a beacon of consumer delight. The Strand, Regent Street, and the newly developed areas of Covent Garden were ablaze with gaslight, turning them into the Times Square of their day. The lights didn't just boost visibility, they enhanced the shopping experience, making it as pleasant as finding a forgotten tenner in your coat pocket. These markets were a testament to the Victorians' love for excess, an indulgence in a time when scarcity was the norm for many. From roasted chestnuts that cost just a penny to luxurious silk scarves that would set you back a few shillings, the markets offered something for every pocket. And let's be honest, who could resist a bit of retail therapy when faced with the bleakness of a London winter? It was capitalism's festive debut, and people were buying it, literally and figuratively. But let's not get too caught up in the glow of gaslights and the jingle of cash registers. The reality, as ever, was more complex. While the well-to-do could afford to splash out on lavish gifts and sumptuous feasts, the working class had to make do with more modest fare. A Christmas goose might be within reach, but a turkey, that was strictly for the Scrooges who'd already had their Ebenezer epiphany. For many, Christmas was a time to stretch the budget as far as it would go, a delicate dance of thrift and indulgence. And here's where the numbers get interesting or depressing, depending on your perspective. A working-class family might earn around £20 a year, with a hefty chunk going to rent and essentials. That left precious little for holiday extravagances. Compare this to the upper crust, who could easily drop £5 on a single Christmas banquet, complete with all the trimmings and a partridge in a pear tree. It was a financial chasm that made the Grand Canyon look like a pothole. Yet, even in the face of such disparity, the Victorians found ways to make merry. Homemade decorations were all the rage, with families crafting garlands from paper and bits of greenery. It was DIY at its finest, proof that where there's a will, there's a way. And speaking of ways, let's not forget the Christmas cracker, invented in 1847 by Tom Smith. This little cardboard tube, filled with a trinket and a terrible joke, became a staple of the Victorian festive table, a reminder that even the simplest pleasures can spark joy. So, what does all this tell us about Victorian Christmas? It's a tale of contrasts, where the gleam of gaslights illuminated both prosperity and poverty. The lights might have been bright, but they also cast long shadows, revealing the inequalities that lay at the heart of society. It was a time when technology and tradition danced a delicate waltz, each step forward met with a glance back at the past. In the end, the story of lights and markets isn't just about commerce or innovation. It's about the human spirit's resilience in the face of adversity. The Victorians, for all their faults, understood that Christmas wasn't just a date on the calendar. It was a state of mind, a flicker of hope in a foggy world. As we continue our exploration of this fascinating era, let's keep that spark alive, remembering that history isn't just about what happened, but why it mattered. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the heart of Victorian London, unwrapping more layers of this complex, captivating story. Now, as we leave the twinkling streets and bustling markets behind, let's take a step back and ponder why Victorian Christmas holds such a firm grip on our collective imagination. It's a curious thing, isn't it? Despite the soot, the smog, and the stark social divides, we still yearn for the Dickensian dream of a snow-dusted holiday, complete with crackling fires and carolers under gas-lit lampposts. But why does this era, rife with contradictions, continue to define modern Christmas celebrations? First, there's the allure of innovation wrapped in tradition. The Victorians were the original Christmas influencers, setting trends that still resonate today. Take the Christmas tree, for instance. When Prince Albert imported the custom from Germany, it wasn't just a decorative flourish. It was a symbol of familial unity and festivity. Fast forward to today, and we can thank our Victorian forebears every time we untangle a string of lights or place a star atop our own evergreen centerpiece. And let's not forget the Christmas card, that little piece of holiday cheer that exploded in popularity thanks to affordable postage and the Victorians' penchant for sending greetings far and wide. The first commercial Christmas card hit the market in 1843, costing a shilling, a hefty sum for a piece of paper, but people snapped them up like the latest smartphone. Another reason for the era's enduring appeal is the narrative it offers, a story of redemption and hope. Dickens' A Christmas Carol isn't just a moral tale. It's a cultural touchstone that reminds us of the power of generosity and second chances. The transformation of Ebenezer Scrooge from miser to benefactor is as much a part of the holiday as mistletoe and mince pies. It's the ultimate feel-good story that assures us even the hardest of hearts can be softened by the spirit of Christmas. Yet, for all its romanticized charm, the Victorian Christmas was a time of stark realities and social critique. It was an era when the disparity between rich and poor was as glaring as the gaslights illuminating London's affluent streets. The workhouses, grim reminders of societal neglect, stood in stark contrast to the ideals of kindness and charity. And while the wealthy indulged in opulent feasts, the less fortunate struggled to make ends meet, relying on the goodwill of their wealthier neighbors. So why do we cling to this nostalgic vision, despite knowing its contradictions? Perhaps it's because Victorian Christmas encapsulates the duality of human experience, the blend of fantasy and reality that defines our lives. We crave the magic of the season, the promise of warmth and togetherness, even as we acknowledge the harsh truths that linger just beyond the tinsel. In today's world, where the holiday season is often synonymous with consumerism and spectacle, the Victorian influence is palpable. The concept of Christmas as a time for family gatherings, gift-giving and feasting was solidified in the 19th century, and it's a tradition we continue to uphold. The commercial markets, once bustling under the glow of gaslights, have evolved into sprawling shopping malls and online marketplaces, yet the essence remains unchanged. Moreover, the Victorians were masters of reinvention, turning Christmas from a raucous carnival to a cherished family holiday. This transformation mirrored society's shifting values as the Industrial Revolution reshaped daily life. The move from agrarian to urban living meant that the extended festivities of old had to be condensed, giving rise to the modern Christmas Day as the focal point of celebration. But here's the thing. As much as we romanticize the past, it's crucial to see it for what it was, a period of profound change and complexity. The Victorian era was a crucible where the old world met the new, where tradition clashed with innovation, and where the seeds of modernity were sown amidst the fog and coal dust. It was a time when society grappled with its conscience, just as we do today. In the end, the enduring legacy of Victorian Christmas isn't just about the customs we inherited. It's about the lessons we can learn. It's a reminder that beneath the veneer of holiday cheer lies the need for compassion and empathy. It's about recognizing the disparities that persist and striving to bridge them, just as Dickens and his contemporaries implored their society to do. So, as we wrap up this journey through the snowy streets of Victorian London, Let's carry forward not just the traditions, but the spirit of introspection and generosity that defined the era. Because history isn't just a collection of dates and events. It's a mirror reflecting who we are and who we aspire to be. And in the glow of our modern Christmas lights, may we find the warmth and wisdom to light the way forward, just as those flickering gas lamps once did for the Victorians. In the shadow of towering stone walls, you find yourself navigating the labyrinthine passages of a feudal Japanese castle, a place where power and strategy were carved into every timber and stone. These castles weren't just about keeping marauding samurai at bay. They were the embodiment of a daimyo's might, a visual statement screaming, "I've got more clout than you." The Tenshu, or the main keep, soared like a dragon cresting the landscape, a jaw-dropping feat of medieval engineering and architectural showmanship. Forget modern skyscrapers. This was the real deal in fortress design. Step back for a moment and appreciate the sheer audacity of these constructions. The Tenshu wasn't just a pretty face. It was a watchtower, command center, and ultimate panic room rolled into one. These keeps could reach up to 7 stories, a literal skyscraper in a world where most buildings barely scraped 2. Each level was like peeling an onion, with defenses becoming more formidable the higher you went. Stone bases that could shrug off cannonballs, wooden structures resistant to earthquakes, and roofs so steep and slippery they'd give a ninja pause. But before you start romanticizing the samurai charging up these stairs with swords drawn, let's pop that bubble. In reality, those epic battles you see on TV were rare. Most attackers preferred to starve a castle out rather than storm its walls, more chess match than action movie. Castles like Heimji and Matsumoto were designed with this in mind, their moats, gates, and walls creating a puzzle that turned siege warfare into an art form. Attackers would find themselves tangled in a web of choke points, false paths, and hidden defenses. It was less charge and conquer, and more let's see if you can crack this tough nut. Now, let's talk about the moat. A moat wasn't just a water feature to keep your enemies swimming. It was a statement of wealth. It said, I can afford to dig a massive trench, fill it with water, and maintain it year after year. The moats at Osaka Castle, for example, stretched over 80 meters wide in some places, a moat so vast, even a determined swimmer would think twice. And those intricate stone walls, they were like a giant jigsaw puzzle, meticulously crafted to withstand both time and warfare. But behind the glamour and strategic brilliance, there was a darker economic reality. Each stone in those walls was a koku-shaped burden. A koku, by the way, was enough rice to feed one person for a year. Imagine balancing the books when a single castle could cost hundreds of thousands of koku to build and maintain. The daimyo weren't just warlords. They were the CEOs of their own feudal corporations, managing resources, labor, and logistics on a scale that would make today's project managers break out in a cold sweat. Maintaining a castle was like owning a vintage car collection, magnificent but financially draining. It wasn't just about keeping the walls standing. There were soldiers to pay, repairs to make, and don't forget the rice. Oh, the rice. It was the currency of the realm, the lifeblood of the samurai economy, and the daimyo were shelling out vast amounts of it to keep their castles not just functional but impressive enough to make their rivals green with envy. Sure, a castle was a fortress, but it was also a stage for political theatrics. Hosting banquets, receiving envoys, staging no less than epic play of power, all under the watchful eyes of the emperor. The castles were symbols, and symbols cost money. Every decorative element, every lavish room, whispered of the daimyo's wealth and influence. But let's not kid ourselves. Those whispers were expensive. Each ornate detail was a reminder of the constant pressure to maintain face and prestige in a world where reputation was everything. So, as you walk through these ancient halls, remember that while the romance of samurai and castles fills our imaginations, the reality was far more grounded. For every sword raised in battle, there were accountants tallying the cost, engineers plotting out defenses, and laborers sweating over stones and timber. Behind the walls of these castles lay the true power of feudal Japan, a complex web of economy, strategy, and a bit of showmanship. And that, my friend, is where the real story lies. So, as you wander deeper into the heart of these labyrinthine castles, let's pull back the curtain on the daily grind that kept this feudal machine whirring like a well-oiled katana. Behind every glorious battle banner and meticulously arranged Zen garden, There were people, lots of them, each playing a crucial role in this grand production. Welcome to the backstage of feudal Japan, where every samurai's polished armor was made possible by an army of unsung heroes. First up, the craftsmen. These folks were the rock stars of the castle workforce, minus the screaming fans and smashed guitars. Their expertise spanned everything from carpentry to metallurgy, each craft a testament to an age-old tradition passed down through generations. These artisans were the ones who could turn a chunk of iron into a finely honed blade or transform timber into the intricate wooden frameworks that held the castle together. The craftsmanship was so top-notch that some of these structures have been standing for centuries. No IKEA hacks here, folks. Then there were the castle's kitchen workers, the unsung chefs who fed the beast. These folks had to keep up with the demands of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of mouths. Let's talk rice, the grain that fueled a nation. Feeding a castle required logistics that would make a modern supply chain manager sweat bullets. We're talking about tens of thousands of koku of rice annually. To put that in perspective, a single koku was enough to feed one person for a year. So imagine the staggering amounts needed just to keep everyone from the samurai to the stable boys from going hangry. And speaking of samurai, let's unravel the myth of their lavish lifestyles. The truth, their days were regimented down to the last second, more boot camp than luxury retreat. Sunrise was a call to action, with training drills that could make a Marine's morning routine look like a spa day. They practiced archery, sword fighting, and horseback riding, all before breakfast, mind you. So much for lounging around in silk robes. When it came to living quarters, the samurai weren't exactly luxuriating in palatial suites. Their rooms were often sparse, with tatami mats and the bare essentials. Privacy was a luxury most couldn't afford, as communal living was the norm. And let's not forget the cold. These stone walls weren't exactly insulated, so winters could be brutally chilly. The samurai might have been masters of the sword, but they were also masters of layering. But why such Spartan conditions, you ask? It wasn't just about keeping the samurai humble. It was a reflection of the economic pressures and practical necessities of maintaining such a fortress. Every corner cut in living expenses was a koku saved for more critical needs, like paying the troops or fixing that section of wall the last typhoon had a go at. Plus, it reinforced the samurai ethos of discipline and frugality, because nothing says honor quite like shivering through a winter night. The logistics of running a castle were a constant juggling act. The daimyo, those feudal lords who ruled the roost, were essentially CEOs of their own medieval enterprises. They had to manage resources with the dexterity of a circus performer juggling flaming swords. One wrong move, and the whole operation could come crashing down in a spectacularly public failure. It was a high-stakes game of resource management, where the currency was rice, and the stakes were prestige, power, and survival. Beyond the walls, the castle's economy extended into the surrounding town. These castle towns, or jakamachi, were bustling hives of economic activity. Merchants, artisans, and farmers all contributed to the local economy, each paying taxes that kept the castle's coffers full. The symbiotic relationship between the town and the castle was crucial. The town provided the goods and services needed to keep the castle functional, while the castle offered protection and a stable market for the town's wares. It was a delicate balance, one that could be upended by everything from a bad harvest to a rival daimyo's ambitions. As you walk these stone corridors, remember that each echoing footstep is a reminder of the human stories that unfolded here. The craftsmen, cooks, and samurai together wove the fabric of castle life, each thread essential to the tapestry of feudal Japan. While the samurai might have wielded the swords, it was the collective effort of these workers that truly powered the castle. So next time you imagine a samurai strolling through these halls, remember the hidden army of laborers, artisans, and cooks who made their world possible. The romance of the samurai was real, but it was built on the backs and rice bowls of countless people whose stories rarely make the history books. And there you have it, a glimpse behind the ornate facade of Japan's iconic castles. As you ponder the tales of courage, strategy, and sheer human grit that unfolded here, keep in mind that the walls may have been built to keep enemies out, but they also held within them an entire world of everyday heroes. So next time you see one of these majestic structures, tip your hat to the real stars of the show. the ones who kept the fires burning, the rice cooking, and the swords sharp. Stay tuned, because there's so much more to uncover about life behind these ancient walls. But let's shift gears from the hammering and bustling of castle life to the high-stakes poker game that was feudal Japan's political scene. Sure, castles were fortresses, but they were also the ultimate VIP lounges of the Sengoku period. Behind these stone walls, alliances were crafted with the precision of a sushi chef, and betrayals were more common than sushi at a Tokyo fish market. Ah, Tokugawa Ieyasu, the ultimate puppet master of this era. This guy didn't just play the game, he rewrote the rules. Born in 1543, Ieyasu rose from a hostage in enemy territory to the shogun who unified Japan. Talk about a comeback story. He wasn't some tyrant swinging swords and shouting orders. He was a chess grandmaster, using castles as pawns to control the board. By 1603, he established the Tokugawa shogunate, a dynasty that would keep a firm grip on Japan for over 250 years. His secret, playing daimyo against each other like a DJ mixing tracks, always keeping the beat in his favor. Now, Ieyasu knew that castles were more than just strongholds. They were powerhouses of diplomacy. Imagine the great hall of a castle as a medieval boardroom where every banquet, every cup of sake, was a negotiation. This was where strategic marriages were brokered, often leaving the bride and groom with about as much choice in the matter as the march-eye on the wedding buffet. These unions were less about love and more about leverage, binding rival clans together in a web of alliances as sticky as natto. And let's not forget the social hierarchies at play. The samurai might have been the rock stars, but castles were also home to a mind-boggling array of officials, each with their own roles and responsibilities. At the top, you had the daimyo, lords of their domains, managing their estates like they were running the world's most cutthroat corporation. Beneath them, the samurai, part warrior, part bureaucrat. And below the samurai lay the foot soldiers and ashigaru, the infantrymen who were the muscle behind the scenes, but often treated like the disposable napkins of the feudal system. These castles were also the setting for some of the most Machiavellian moves in history. Take the siege of Osaka in 1615, for example. Ieyasu, now an old man but as sharp as ever, saw the Toyotomi clan holed up in Osaka Castle as a threat to his hard-won peace. So he laid siege. But this was more chess than checkers. He didn't just storm the gates. He encircled the castle, cutting off supplies and wading like a cat at a mouse hole. When Osaka fell, it wasn't just a military victory. It was the final nail in the coffin for any opposition to Tokugawa rule. The political machinations didn't end there. Castles were also the stage for hostage swaps, a common practice where a daimyo's child might be sent to live in another lord's castle as a guest. Read, insurance policy. These kids were treated well, often educated and trained in the arts of war and diplomacy. But let's be real. They were living, breathing guarantees of their father's good behavior. If Dad stepped out of line, his kid's future could be cut shorter than a bad samurai haircut. And here's the kicker. These castles were supposed to be symbols of peace, stability, and prosperity. But the reality, they were more like pressure cookers, where the temperature could rise with a single misstep. A wrong word in a negotiation, a failed harvest, or an ill-timed betrayal could send ripple effects that would topple alliances and spark conflict. These were not just homes or fortresses. They were the nerve centers of a nation perpetually on the brink of chaos. But don't just take my word for it. Take a walk through the corridors of Nijo Castle in Kyoto, built by Ieyasu himself as a demonstration of his power. Here, the architecture itself was a political statement. The ostentatious Karaman gate, the intricate carvings, the lavish interiors, they all screamed prestige and authority. Every room had a function in the political ballet of the time, from the shogun's audience chamber to the private meeting rooms where secrets were exchanged like currency. In this world, even the gardens were political tools. The carefully manicured landscapes were more than just pretty backdrops. They were a reflection of the daimyo's power and taste. And those tea ceremonies you've heard about, they were less about sipping matcha and more about subtle diplomacy, where every gesture, every word was loaded with meaning. So, as you stand in the shadow of these towering walls, remember that behind every stone was a story of power, prestige, and political maneuvering. Castles were not just the backdrop of history. They were the stage upon which the drama of feudal Japan unfolded, with Tokugawa Ieyasu as one of its most masterful directors. And while the samurai might have wielded the swords, it was the politicians and strategists who truly shaped the fate of a nation. Stay tuned, because there's more intrigue, more drama, and plenty more rice-fueled chess moves to come. Now, let's dive into the softer side of these stone giants, where the clamor of swords and the rustle of silk kimonos intersected in a delicate dance of art and tradition. You see, these castles weren't just about keeping marauders at bay. They were also the nerve centers of Japan's cultural renaissance, where Zen philosophy seeped into the very mortar that held those imposing walls together. The castle's gardens, for instance, were not your typical let's plant some flowers and call it a day kind of deal. Oh no, these were masterfully crafted landscapes, each rock and pond meticulously placed to evoke the natural beauty of the Japanese countryside. Stroll through the grounds of the Korakuen Garden in Akeyama, and you'll find yourself in a living canvas, where every view is a painting and every step is a meditation. But hold on, before you get too swept up in the romance of it all, remember, these gardens were as much about politics as aesthetics. When a rival daimyo came to visit, a walk through the gardens was a not-so-subtle message. It said, "Look at my taste, my sophistication, my ability to create harmony." In essence, it was a horticultural flex, a way to say, my Zen game is stronger than yours. And what about those legendary tea ceremonies? You've probably heard they were the epitome of Zen simplicity, right? Well, they were also high-stakes diplomacy in a teacup. Imagine sitting across from a potential ally or rival, every gesture calculated, every sip a subtle negotiation. The tea room was the ultimate neutral ground, stripped of distractions, where the art of conversation was honed to a fine point. And when I say fine, I mean slicing through the tension with a samurai's precision. Let's talk aesthetics. The castle's interiors were a study in contrasts. Sure, there were the grand halls with their ornate screens and rich tatami mats, but there was also a deliberate restraint at play. The influence of Zen philosophy encouraged simplicity and focus, a rejection of the flamboyant in favor of the understated. This wasn't just about taste. It was about projecting an image of control and discipline, a reminder that beneath the silk and gold, the samurai spirit was ever present. Now, let's not breeze past the economics behind this artistic splendor. Creating these masterpieces wasn't cheap. Those artfully placed rocks, imported at great expense. The tea utensils, handcrafted by the finest artisans. Each element was a testament to wealth and power, a visual representation of a daimyo's ability to command resources and people. In a world where rice was currency, this was like flaunting a vault full of gold bars. The influence of Zen on castle design wasn't limited to the visible. The flow of a castle, the way rooms connected, was designed to reflect the Zen ideal of seamless transition and balance. Take Nijo Castle's famous nightingale floors. Ingeniously built to chirp underfoot, they served a dual purpose, an aesthetic delight and a practical alarm system. So, while you marveled at the auditory wonder, the daimyo had one ear tuned to potential intruders. And here's something fun to chew on. The Zen gardens and tea ceremonies weren't just the domain of the elite. The cultural ripple effect spread through the societal pond, influencing everything from local craftsmanship to the architecture of towns. Common folk might not have had sprawling gardens, but the principles of Zen found their way into the simplicity and functionality of everyday life, a philosophy that valued the beauty of the mundane. Fast forward to today, and you see how these practices laid the groundwork for Japan's reputation as a cultural powerhouse. Just like the daimyo used art for soft power, modern Japan wields cultural exports like anime, cuisine, and J-pop with similar aplomb. It's a testament to the enduring idea that culture, rather than brute force, often shapes the world's perceptions. So, as you stand in the shadow of these ancient walls, remember that each stone, each garden, was a chapter in the story of a nation's identity. The castles were not just fortresses, but crucibles of culture, where the delicate art of diplomacy was as vital as the art of war. Stay tuned, because the intrigue and elegance of feudal Japan continue to unfold, and there's still more to discover about the legacy of these majestic strongholds. Speaking of legacy, let's fast forward a few centuries and take a good look at what's left of these stone giants today. You might think that these castles, which once stood as impregnable fortresses, would have weathered time without a scratch. But reality, as always, has a different script. Natural disasters, shifting military technologies, and a little thing called modernization had other plans. Earthquakes, for instance, didn't give a hoot about their historical significance. Take Heimji Castle, which has survived more tectonic tantrums than a toddler on a sugar high. And while it still stands tall, many others weren't so lucky. The 1868 Meiji Restoration was like a cultural earthquake, toppling the shogunate and dragging Japan kicking and screaming into the industrial age. Castles, once the epicenters of power and prestige, became about as useful as a samurai in a silicon chip factory. Suddenly, the need for these grandiose fortresses evaporated faster than a ninja's shadow at sunrise. The government, keen on reinventing Japan as a modern power, saw them as relics of an era best left in the past. Cue the wrecking balls, or their 19th century equivalent. But before we paint the Meiji era as some kind of cultural villain, let's give credit where it's due. The new government recognized that some of these castles were worth preserving, not as military bastions, but as cultural treasures. Today, you can stroll through the serene grounds of Matsumoto Castle, one of the national treasures of Japan, breathing in the history that lingers in the air like a fine mist. Then there's the matter of changing military strategies. The advent of gunpowder and cannons had already started making traditional castle defenses about as effective as an umbrella in a hurricane. Castles were designed to withstand arrows and swords, not cannonballs and explosives. By the time Commodore Perry's black ships rolled into Edo Bay in 1853, it was clear that wooden walls and stone moats couldn't stand up to modern firepower. The samurai might have been able to dodge arrows, but even their legendary skills couldn't deflect a well-aimed cannonball. As castles lost their military relevance, they found a new lease on life as tourist attractions. Imagine that, a place once filled with the clamor of armor and the whisper of political intrigue, now echoing with the clicks of cameras and the chatter of guided tours. This transformation wasn't just a twist of fate. It was a deliberate effort to preserve history and foster national pride. Castles like Nagoya and Kumamoto have been meticulously restored and now draw millions of visitors each year, each one a living testament to Japan's rich cultural tapestry. Let's not forget the economics of tourism. Turning these ancient fortresses into attractions wasn't just about preserving the past. It was also about fueling local economies. The revenue from ticket sales, souvenir shops, and local businesses helps keep these castles in pristine condition. It's a win-win. History gets preserved, and the local economy gets a boost. So next time you're sipping matcha while admiring the view from Osaka Castle, remember, you're not just indulging in a cultural experience. You're contributing to the preservation of history. Now, as we stand in the shadow of these ancient walls, it's fascinating to see how they've become symbols of national identity. The romanticized image of the samurai, once the stuff of legend and mythology, has been repurposed into a cultural icon. It's a bit like seeing a vintage samurai sword hanging in a contemporary art museum, a blend of past and present that shapes today's cultural narrative. These castles serve as a physical reminder of a time when honor, loyalty, and strategy were the currency of the realm. But let's cut through the romance and get real. The feudal system that sustained these castles was as brutal as it was beautiful. Behind every epic tale of samurai valor was a harsher reality of peasants toiling under heavy taxes and rigid hierarchies. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of chivalry and bushido, but those ideals often came at a steep cost for the common folk who supported the castle's grandeur with their labor and their koku. And then there's the enduring myth of the samurai lifestyle, a narrative filled with honor and elegance, but also with hard realities. It's a story that's as much about sacrifice and survival as it is about glory. The samurai were warriors, yes, but they were also part of a complex social structure that demanded as much mental agility as martial skill. It's a reminder that history is often more nuanced than the legends it spawns. As we wrap up our journey through the world of feudal Japanese castles, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of myth and reality. These castles, with their towering walls and storied pasts, remind us that the truth is often more compelling than fiction. They are a testament to human ingenuity and resilience, to the power of culture and tradition, and to the ever-evolving narrative of history. So next time you find yourself gazing at one of these majestic structures, take a moment to reflect on the stories contained within their walls, the tales of power and politics, of art and war, of triumph and tragedy. Remember that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives. And as you walk away, carry with you a piece of that legacy, a reminder of the fascinating world that lies just beyond the drawbridge. Pharaohs, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of rock stars, but swapped the electric guitar for a scepter and the adoring fans for worshipful subjects who believed these rulers were living gods on earth. That's right, being a pharaoh wasn't just about wearing some snazzy headgear and sitting on a golden throne. It was a divine gig, complete with the expectation that you'd manage to keep the cosmos in order. So, no pressure. But let's not get too carried away by the grandeur. Pharaoh's divine status came with some truly peculiar customs that would raise eyebrows even in today's most scandalous tabloids. Take marriage practices, for example. While modern royals might face scrutiny for marrying a commoner, the pharaohs had a different strategy. Keep it in the family. And by family, I mean close family. We're talking brother-sister unions that would make even the writers of Game of Thrones do a double take, before your imagination runs too wild. There was a method to this matrimonial madness. Sure, sibling marriages sound like a plot twist too far, but for the pharaohs, these unions were less about passion and more about politics and power. Think of it as a very ancient version of corporate mergers. The goal was to preserve the royal bloodline, ensuring that it remained as divine as possible. After all, if you're claiming to be chosen by the gods, you might as well keep your lineage godlike, too. The ancient Egyptians took the concept of keeping it all in the family to surprising lengths. Ramses Roman II, one of the most famous pharaohs, reportedly had over 100 children, which sounds like a logistical nightmare in terms of family reunions. And while some of those offspring were products of sibling marriages, others came from various wives and concubines. Each marriage was a strategic alliance, not unlike a game of chess, where every move was calculated to maintain or expand power. Now, let's throw some numbers into the mix. The pharaohs didn't just marry their siblings because they fancied playing house with family. It was a shrewd economic move. By consolidating wealth and power within the family, the pharaohs could maintain control over vast estates and resources. When you're dealing with an empire that stretched over 386,000 square miles at its peak, with an economy driven by agriculture along the Nile, keeping the wealth centralized was a smart move. It's like Monopoly, but the stakes were far higher than a few colorful banknotes. But how did the people feel about this? Well, the pharaohs were seen as semi-divine, so their actions were often beyond reproach. The idea of a living god marrying his sister wasn't as scandalous to the ancient Egyptians as it might seem today. In fact, it was considered a reaffirmation of their divine origins. The pharaohs were expected to embody the stability and order of the universe, and what better way to maintain order than by sticking with the tried and tested family formula? Of course, not every pharaoh could pull off these familial alliances without a hitch. Political intrigue was as much a part of ancient Egyptian life as the annual flooding of the Nile. Rival factions, ambitious relatives, and scheming courtiers could turn the royal court into a hotbed of tension. It wasn't unheard of for a pharaoh to face challenges from within their own family, leading to power struggles that could rival any modern-day political drama. Yet, these complex family dynamics were crucial in maintaining the pharaoh's grip on power. Marrying a sister wasn't just a family affair. It was a statement of authority, a declaration that the pharaohs were above the ordinary rules that governed the lives of their subjects. It's a fascinating dance between the divine and the mundane, where every marriage was a move in the chess game of ancient Egyptian politics. So, as we peel back the layers of mythology and grandeur, we find that the pharaohs' marital practices were less about romance and more a calculated strategy to maintain their version of cosmic order. It's a reminder that even the divine had to play by certain earthly rules, albeit their own unique set. In the end, these sibling marriages were a testament to the pharaoh's ultimate goal, to keep the throne secure, the guards appeased, and the Nile flowing smoothly. And speaking of cosmic order, Let's dive into the earthly rituals that kept the pharaohs looking as divine as their lineage demanded. Just like today's celebs, ancient Egyptian rulers had a beauty regimen that would make Instagram influencers green with envy. Forget about modern-day beauty standards. These folks were setting trends millennia ago, and some of their practices would make even the most adventurous fashionista raise an eyebrow. Take makeup, for instance. The Egyptians didn't just use it to look good. It was practically a matter of state. Both men and women, because equality, right, dabbled in cosmetics that were as colorful as the Nile at sunset. Kohl, a black eyeliner made from galena, was the must-have item in every makeup kit, used not just for aesthetic purposes, but also to protect against the harsh glare of the sun. It's like the ancient SPF. Cleopatra, the ultimate beauty icon of her time, would have probably been a Sephora VIB Rouge with her extensive collection of pigments. Then there's body hair, or rather, the lack of it. Smooth skin was all the rage, and both genders went to considerable lengths to achieve this look. They used a sticky concoction made from sugar, water, and lemon juice, a predecessor to modern-day waxing methods. That's right, the pharaohs were sugaring long before it became trendy. This wasn't just about vanity. It was believed that removing body hair was a way to keep clean and maintain health. Talk about hygiene meets high fashion. But wait, there's more. Perfumes were another big deal. The ancient Egyptians were the OG scent enthusiasts, creating complex fragrances from myrrh, frankincense, and a bouquet of other exotic ingredients. Perfumes were not just for personal use. They played a role in religious rituals and were considered an aphrodisiac. So, when Pharaoh strutted into the temple, you better believe they left a fragrant trail that rivaled any duty-free shop at the airport. Now, while all this beautification was happening, let's not forget the rituals that intertwined desire, fertility, and divine duty. Being a pharaoh wasn't just about looking the part. It was also about performing your role on the cosmic stage. Many of these rulers participated in fertility rites that would make your average office team-building exercise look like a walk in the park. The Apit Festival, for example, was a grand affair that celebrated the annual flooding of the Nile, a life-giving event crucial for agriculture. The pharaoh would engage in rituals to ensure the fertility of the land, which often involved some suggestive symbolism. And speaking of suggestive, let's talk about the god Min. Picture a deity whose job description included being the god of fertility and sexuality. Statues of Min were often, well endowed, and offerings to this virile figure were meant to invoke prosperity and abundance. The pharaohs, acting as intermediaries between the gods and the people, engaged in such rites to demonstrate their role in maintaining the natural order. It was as much about public expectation as it was personal belief, because when you're considered a living god, performance reviews take on a whole new meaning. But here's the kicker. These practices weren't just about keeping the divine happy. They were intricately tied to the economy. The Nile's flooding was essential to agriculture, and agriculture was the backbone of the Egyptian economy. With an empire that spanned from the Mediterranean Sea to the first cataract of the Nile, making sure those fields were fertile was a matter of national security. So, when the pharaoh participated in these fertility rituals, it was a way to ensure the prosperity of the kingdom, maintaining both cosmic order and economic stability. In the end, the pharaoh's beauty and fertility practices were a blend of personal preference, public duty, and political strategy. They had to look the part, act the part, and ensure that the cosmos was in check, all while managing an empire. It's a reminder that even when you're a divine ruler with the world at your feet, sometimes you still have to put on a little eyeliner and perform a dance to keep everything running smoothly. And while these rituals might sound strange to modern ears, they were part of a complex system that kept the ancient Egyptian world turning. It's history's way of showing us that beauty and power have always been intertwined, even when the stakes are as high as keeping the Nile flowing and the fields green. So, while the pharaohs were busy perfecting their eyeliner game and ensuring the Nile's waters didn't take a sabbatical, they also had another ace up their linen sleeves: royal harems. Think of these as the VIP sections of the ancient world. But instead of velvet ropes, you've got stone walls and guards who really mean business. It's where pharaohs lived a lifestyle that would make even the most extravagant rock stars blush. Now, before you let your imagination run wild with visions of grandiose palaces overflowing with jewels and intrigue, let's pump the brakes and look at the facts. The term harem often conjures up images of countless women lounging around in opulence, but historical records paint a more nuanced picture. Sure, there were indeed a lot of people involved, but not in the way popular culture might have you believe. First off, the logistics of a harem were staggering. We're talking about a small city within a city. The pharaohs' harems weren't just about leisure and romance. They were complex institutions with their own economies and hierarchies. At its peak, the harem of Pharaoh Ramses Roman III reportedly housed around 20,000 people. That's right, 20,000. We're not just talking wives and concubines here. We're including children, servants, guards, and artisans who kept the whole operation running. Picture a bustling community, more akin to a corporate headquarters than a personal retreat. And as with any large operation, there were costs. Feeding, clothing, and maintaining such a large entourage wasn't cheap. The harem had its own agricultural estates, which provided food and resources to sustain the community. These estates were crucial because, let's face it, even a pharaoh couldn't just pop down to the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a supermarket to stock up on bread and beer. And yes, beer was a staple of the Egyptian diet, consumed by all ages and classes. It was high in calories and protein, a meal in a mug, if you will. But how did this lavish setup impact the economy? Well, it required a steady flow of resources from the surrounding lands. The harem's estates were often worked by laborers who were drafted from the general populace, and the taxes collected from these lands helped fund the lavish lifestyles within. This economic model wasn't just about luxury. It was a way to consolidate power. The harem allowed the pharaoh to keep potential rivals close, quite literally under his roof, minimizing the risk of rebellion and ensuring loyalty through proximity and patronage. Now, let's talk about the myths. A common misconception is that the harem was a place where the pharaoh could indulge his every whim with thousands of women at his beck and call. In reality, the harem was more of a residence for the royal family and its dependents. While the pharaoh did have multiple wives and concubines, it wasn't the free-for-all that some might imagine. These relationships were often strategic, aimed at cementing alliances and consolidating power. Through marriage, the pharaoh could forge ties with influential families both within Egypt and in neighboring territories. Moreover, the women in the harem were not just passive participants in a royal soap opera. Many of them wielded significant influence, especially the queen or great royal wife. She was a political player in her own right, often acting as an advisor to the pharaoh and sometimes even governing in his absence. Some queens, like Hatshepsut, even ascended to the throne, ruling as pharaohs themselves. Talk about shattering the glass ceiling with a golden scepter. And let's not overlook the internal dynamics of these royal retreats. Living in such close quarters, with numerous relatives and rivals, could turn the harem into a pressure cooker of intrigue and power struggles. The infamous harem conspiracy during Ramses' Roman III reign is a prime example of this. It was a plot hatched by one of the pharaoh's secondary wives, who sought to place her son on the throne. The conspiracy led to a trial and execution spree that shook the royal household to its core. It was like an ancient Egyptian version of succession, but with more sand and hieroglyphs. So, while the harem might seem like a glamorous perk of being a pharaoh, it was also a complex web of political maneuvering, economic necessity, and familial tension. It wasn't just about indulgence. It was about control, controlling allies, controlling resources, and ultimately controlling the narrative of the pharaoh's reign. The harem was both a symbol of the pharaoh's power and a tool to maintain it. In the end, these royal retreats were a microcosm of the larger world outside their walls. They reflected the intricate balance of power, politics, and economy that defined ancient Egypt. They remind us that even divine rulers had to navigate the messy realities of governance. And while the myths of opulence and indulgence have their appeal, the truth is far more fascinating, revealing the delicate dance of authority, influence, and survival in a world where the stakes were as high as the pyramids themselves. Thus, as we dig deeper into the world of the pharaohs, we find a story that's as much about human nature as it is about history. It's a tale of ambition, strategy, and the perpetual quest to keep power in check. And as we continue to unravel the mysteries of ancient Egypt, one thing is clear. Behind the grandeur and mythology lay a world that was as complex and captivating as any epic ever told. And speaking of the complexities behind the grandeur, there's no better place to peek into the Pharaohs' peculiar world than during their elaborate religious ceremonies. Imagine a royal procession that's part ritual, part political theatre, and 100% ancient swag. These events were where the Pharaohs truly flexed their divine muscles and reminded everyone who was in charge, not just on Earth, but supposedly in the cosmic order too. Now, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of these ceremonies, where power and sexuality danced an intriguing tango. One of the most fascinating rituals was the Hebsed Festival, also known as the Sed Festival, a sort of royal jubilee that took place after a pharaoh had reigned for 30 years. Think of it as a mix between a State of the Kingdom address and a cosmic renewal party. The pharaoh would participate in a series of symbolic acts, including a ritual run to demonstrate his vitality, and shall we say, virility. After all, nothing screams, "I'm still fit to rule," like jogging in the desert heat while wearing a ceremonial kilt. This festival wasn't just a physical feat, it was laden with symbolic meaning. By successfully completing the ritual, the pharaoh was reaffirming his role as the linchpin between the gods and his people. It was a public display of vigor that reassured the masses their ruler was still up to the task of keeping the universe ticking smoothly. Because, if the pharaoh could still run a few laps, then surely the Nile would flood as expected, and the crops would grow. It was an ancient PR stunt with very real stakes. But here's where it gets even more interesting: the sexual symbolism. The pharaoh was often depicted in these ceremonies as a virile bull, an image that played into the fertility myths of the time. In ancient Egypt, bulls were seen as symbols of power and strength, and by associating himself with such imagery, the pharaoh was not so subtly reminding everyone of his prowess, not just in governance, but in ensuring the fertility of the land. This was more than just a show of strength. It was an assertion of the pharaoh's ability to balance the forces of chaos and order, a key theme in Egyptian religion. Now, let's tackle a few of the myths swirling around these rites. The tales of pharaohs indulging in excesses during these festivals have been exaggerated over time, often tinged with a mix of ancient propaganda and modern imagination. Take Cleopatra, for instance, often portrayed as a seductress who used her charms to keep Rome under her thumb. The reality was far more nuanced. While she was indeed a savvy political operator, much of her supposed sexual exploits can be chalked up to Roman propaganda designed to undermine her authority. Similarly, stories of pharaohs engaging in lavish orgies during these festivals are more likely the product of later gossip than historical fact. In truth, these ceremonies were solemn affairs, deeply rooted in religious significance and political necessity. The ancient Egyptian court was less of a decadent free-for-all and more a tightly controlled environment where every move was deliberate and calculated to maintain the pharaoh's image as the divine intermediary. Yet, the allure of these myths persists, partly because they encapsulate our fascination with power and its excesses. They offer a glimpse into a world where the boundaries between the earthly and the divine were blurred, and where rulers were seen as more than mere mortals. It's a narrative that's hard to resist, even if the reality was more mundane, albeit no less significant. Let's not forget that these rituals were as much about economic stability as they were about cosmic balance. The pharaoh's role in ensuring the fertility of the land had direct implications for Egypt's agricultural output, which was the backbone of its economy. The Nile's predictable flooding was critical for sustaining the vast empire, and anything that threatened this cycle, from a weak ruler to divine disfavor, was a cause for concern. So, when a pharaoh donned his ceremonial garb and performed these symbolic acts, it was a public assurance that the natural order would prevail and the economy would thrive. In exploring these ceremonials, we see how the intersection of power and sexuality was woven into the very fabric of ancient Egyptian life. It was a world where the pharaoh's personal vitality was equated with the health of the state, and where ceremonial acts were imbued with layers of meaning, from the political to the spiritual. These rituals were not just about maintaining the status quo. They were a dynamic assertion of the pharaoh's ability to harness both earthly and cosmic forces. As we sift through the sands of time, we find that the tales of pharaohs and their symbolic acts are a testament to the enduring power of myth and imagination. They remind us that while the stories may be grandiose, the reality was a complex tapestry of human ambition, political necessity, and religious devotion. And while some pharaohs might have relished their role as living guards, they also had to contend with the very human challenges of leadership, diplomacy, and legacy. So, as we continue to unravel the mysteries of these ancient rulers, we're left with a picture that's both awe-inspiring and deeply human. It's a reminder that even in a world where the lines between myth and reality were often blurred, the quest for power, stability, and immortality was as real then as it is today. And speaking of quests for immortality, stay tuned for more tales from the annals of ancient Egypt as we dive deeper into the enigmatic world of the pharaohs. As we continue our journey through the sand-swept annals of ancient Egypt, it's time to think about the echoes of these pharaohs' peculiar customs in our modern world. The legacy of their sexual politics is a fascinating testament to how power structures can transcend millennia. You may not be a guard king with a penchant for sibling marriages, but the influence of ancient Egyptian rulers still looms large in today's political and cultural landscapes. Let's start by considering the pharaohs' approach to power consolidation, a strategy that feels oddly familiar in today's corporate takeovers and political alliances. The idea of keeping it all in the family, albeit not as literally as brother-sister unions, still resonates. Just take a look at how political dynasties operate worldwide. These families aren't shy about keeping their influence within their clan, ensuring that the reins of power remain firmly in trusted hands. Whether it's the Kennedys in the United States or the Nehru-Gandhi family in India, the concept of consolidating power through familial lines echoes the pharaoh's own strategies. But let's not forget the economic rationale behind those ancient matrimonial mergers. Consolidating resources was as essential then as it is now. The ancient Egyptians understood that a tightly controlled economy, centered around a divine figurehead, could stabilize an empire stretching over 386,000 square miles. Fast forward to today, and we see nations and corporations using mergers and acquisitions, not unlike those dynastic marriages, to maintain economic dominance. It's monopoly with real consequences, where the stakes are a bit higher than a colorful board game. And how about the pharaohs' divinely sanctioned image management? Their beauty rituals, fertility rites, and religious ceremonies were all about projecting an image of vitality and divine favor. Today, we see a similar obsession with optics in politics and celebrity culture. Public figures meticulously curate their appearance and actions to align with the image they want to project. It's the ancient equivalent of a presidential photo op or a red carpet appearance, where every eyeliner stroke and ceremonial jog was designed to reinforce their celestial status. Now, here's where things get spicy. The myths, the allure of the pharaoh's extravagant lifestyles persists, even if the reality was more bureaucratic than bacchanalian. These narratives endure because they tap into our fascination with power's excesses. After all, who doesn't love a good story about decadence and divine intrigue? The truth, however, is that these myths often served as political propaganda, designed to either glorify or vilify depending on who was telling the story. Cleopatra, for example, became a symbol of seduction and cunning, but much of this was a Roman smear campaign to discredit her leadership. It's a reminder that history is often written by those with the biggest chisel or the sharpest pen. In a world where the pharaohs were seen as living guards, the separation between myth and reality was often as blurred as the lines on a papyrus scroll. Yet, these narratives reveal something deeply human about our leaders, the perpetual struggle to maintain power, legitimacy, and control. While the specifics have changed, the core challenges remain the same. Whether you're a pharaoh or a president, the dance of governance involves balancing public perception, political alliances, and economic stability. This brings us to the human elements behind these grand narratives. At the heart of the Pharaoh story is a tale of ambition, strategy, and the desire for immortality, not just in the afterlife, but in the annals of history. They were individuals navigating a complex web of politics, religion, and personal ambition. While their methods might seem alien to us, their motivations are all too relatable. After all, who wouldn't want to be remembered as a living god, an eternal figure in the tapestry of history? It's a quest for legacy that transcends time, reminding us of the universal human desire to leave a mark. In peeling back the layers of mythology and grandeur, we find a reality that's as captivating as it is complex. The pharaohs were more than just rulers. They were symbols of stability in a world where the balance of cosmic order was as crucial as the Nile's floodwaters. Their legacy, with all its peculiarities, offers a fascinating lens through which to view our own world. It challenges us to question the stories we tell about power and the ways we choose to wield it. So, as we wrap up our odyssey through the intimate and often eyebrow-raising world of the pharaohs, let's carry forward the lessons their history imparts. The allure of power, the machinations of politics, and the quest for immortality are as relevant now as they were on the banks of the Nile. And while we may not be darning ceremonial kilts or performing fertility rites, the echoes of ancient Egypt continue to reverberate in our modern lives, reminding us that even in the sands of time, some stories never truly fade away. In the swirling sands of ancient history, the year 69 BC marked a peculiar moment in Egypt, a country known for its monumental pyramids, riverine guards, and a penchant for extravagance that would make even the Kardashians look frugal. At this time, the land of the pharaohs was more like an unhinged soap opera than a harmonious kingdom. Enter Cleopatra, Roman 7, not yet the infamous ruler who would seduce both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, but a young girl navigating the treacherous waters of a dynasty better suited for a reality TV show spin-off titled Keeping Up with the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies weren't your average family. They were a Macedonian Greek clan that had been ruling Egypt since Alexander the Great decided to play a game of who can conquer the most land. Back in 332 BC. Fast forward 3 centuries, and the Ptolemaic dynasty was hanging on by a thread, thanks to the Romans breathing down their necks like an overly interested neighbor. The Ptolemies were notorious for treating family reunions like gladiatorial contests, their favorite pastime. Sibling rivalry that involved more than just passive-aggressive comments over dinner. Try murder and betrayal, the kind that would make Shakespeare's tragedies look like bedtime stories. Cleopatra was born into this delightful chaos, the third child of Ptolemy Roman 12, also known as Auletes. Auletes means flute player, which is possibly the least intimidating nickname for a pharaoh ever. Picture a ruler more interested in his musical pursuits than managing a kingdom teetering on the brink of collapse. The man was more likely to be found at a jam session than a war council. This left Cleopatra to learn the political ropes early on, and boy, did she have a knack for it. Now, let's shadow one of the biggest myths about Cleopatra. She wasn't just a pretty face. In fact, ancient coins suggest her nose was more in the distinctive category than the glamorous one. But Cleopatra had other weapons in her arsenal, her brain and her charisma. She was a polyglot, fluent in at least 9 languages, including Egyptian, which was a big deal since her predecessors couldn't be bothered to learn the language of the people they ruled. She was like the Hermione Granger of her time, minus the wand, but with a killer instinct for survival. Cleopatra's education was nothing short of impressive. She was schooled in Alexandria, a city that was the ancient world's equivalent of Silicon Valley, Harvard, and the Met all rolled into one. Home to the great library, Alexandria was the intellectual capital of the world, and Cleopatra took full advantage of it. She studied mathematics, philosophy, oratory, and astronomy. Her tutors were the best money could buy, and they had deep pockets thanks to the Nile's bounty and a hefty tax collection system that would make the IRS blush. And speaking of taxes, Egypt's economy was a peculiar beast. The Nile Delta was like the Tesla of agriculture, environmentally friendly and incredibly efficient, providing bountiful harvests that fed not just Egypt, but a significant chunk of the Mediterranean. The Ptolemies knew how to milk this cash cow, imposing taxes that were as complicated as winning an Oscar. Cleopatra, ever the savvy operator, understood that maintaining economic stability was key to keeping Rome at bay and her own head firmly attached to her shoulders. But let's not forget that Cleopatra's ascent was anything but easy. Her family tree was more like a family thicket, tangled with intrigue and laced with danger. Cleopatra's siblings included her sister Berenice Roman 4, who took the throne when their father was temporarily booted out by the Alexandrians in 58 BC. Berenice was the kind of sister who, instead of just borrowing your clothes without asking, would rather rule in your place. Auletes eventually regained the throne with Roman help, but not without some bloodshed, which was basically the Ptolemaic family motto. By the time Cleopatra was actually in a position to rule, she had learned from the best or worst, depending on how you look at it. She knew that to survive, she had to outmaneuver, outthink, and outlast her rivals, both within her own family and outside it. Her early life was a masterclass in political chess, where the stakes were life and death, and the pieces were often her own kin. Thus, Cleopatra was molded not just by the opulence and knowledge of Alexandria, but by the cutthroat environment of Ptolemaic politics. Cleopatra's Egypt was a land of contradictions, immensely wealthy yet politically unstable, culturally rich yet rife with internal strife. It was a kingdom where a young girl could rise to power not by divine right or royal decree, but through sheer intellect and indomitable will. Cleopatra was getting ready to step onto the world stage, where her brilliance would shine as bright as the Egyptian sun, yet her reign would be shadowed by the ever-looming spectre of Roman imperialism. But for now, she was learning, watching, and waiting, and when the time came, she would be ready to make her move. Now, it's time to buckle up, because Cleopatra's journey to the throne was less of a royal ascent and more of a reality TV drama with a side of political intrigue. When Ptolemy Roman XII passed away in 51 BC, he left the throne to Cleopatra and her younger brother Ptolemy Roman XIII. Yes, you heard that right. Ancient Egypt was playing the sibling co-ruler card, and it was as awkward as it sounds. Cleopatra was around 18, and Ptolemy Roman XIII was just a mere 10-year-old, meaning he was probably more interested in chariot toys than statecraft. But fret not, the real power struggle was about to unfold. Cleopatra wasn't just content with sharing power, and who could blame her? She had the brains, the charisma, and the ambition to lead alone. Meanwhile, Ptolemy Roman XIII had advisors who were less about advising and more about manipulating the young king to sideline his sister. Enter the scheming duo, Parthenos, the regent, and Achilles, the military commander. They were like the ancient world's version of Machiavellian sidekicks, whispering plans into young Ptolemy's ear. By 49 BC, Cleopatra was ousted and had to make a strategic retreat to Syria. Talk about sibling rivalry with stakes higher than a Game of Thrones episode. Now, Cleopatra wasn't the sort to sit around and mope. She gathered her own army and plotted a comeback. As luck, or perhaps fate, would have it, this was around the time Julius Caesar, Rome's top dog, arrived in Alexandria. Caesar, ever the opportunist, had his own reasons for being in Egypt. He was chasing after Pompey, his former ally and now rival, who had fled to Egypt. But in a twist that could make even the ancient Greek playwrights jealous, Pompey was assassinated by Ptolemy Roman XIII advisors in a misguided attempt to gain favor with Caesar. Spoiler alert, Caesar was not impressed. Cleopatra saw her chance. She had to meet Caesar, but the city was hostile, and her brother's lackeys were watching every gate. Enter the infamous carpet incident of 48 BC. Forget any notions of Cleopatra rolling out like a red carpet diva at a Hollywood premiere. The reality was more practical. She had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters wrapped in a rug or perhaps a linen sack, depending on which historian you ask. Either way, it was less glamorous than the legends suggest. But what a power move. Cleopatra knew that first impressions count, and boy, did she make one. Once unrolled, Cleopatra's charm offensive began. It's easy to romanticize this meeting as a love-at-first-sight scenario, but Cleopatra was playing 3D chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Caesar was 52, a seasoned politician and general, while Cleopatra was 21, sharp as a tack and fully aware of the stakes. She needed his support to reclaim her throne, and Caesar needed Egypt's grain supply to feed Rome. The economics were as simple as they were critical. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, and Cleopatra's control over it was a bargaining chip that she wielded with finesse. Their alliance was as strategic as it was personal. With Caesar's backing, she managed to defeat Ptolemy Roman XIII forces in the Battle of the Nile in 47 BC. Ptolemy Roman XIII met his end in the river, possibly trying to escape, leaving Cleopatra to rule alongside her even younger brother, Ptolemy Roman XIV. Yes, another brother, because why not keep things in the family right? Cleopatra was back on the throne, but this time she was the real power behind the gilded facade. But Cleopatra didn't just rely on Caesar to secure her position. She understood the importance of Egypt's economy and the political necessity of keeping the Roman Senate appeased. The Nile's annual flooding meant bountiful harvests, and Cleopatra ensured that the grain kept flowing to Rome. She shrewdly managed Egypt's resources, leveraging them to maintain her independence while placating Rome's insatiable appetite for food and prestige. Cleopatra was no fool. She knew that Roman politics were as turbulent as the Mediterranean Sea, and her best bet was to keep Rome's leaders fed, and therefore happy, or at least not actively hostile. And let's talk about the currency of power, literally. Cleopatra had coins minted with her image, not just as a show of vanity, but as a statement. These coins depicted her as a strong, commanding ruler, and they circulated throughout the Mediterranean, broadcasting her authority far and wide. They were ancient propaganda, a way to reinforce her legitimacy and challenge the Roman narrative that she was merely a puppet ruler. Cleopatra's reign was one of balancing acts. She had to keep the Alexandrian elites satisfied, manage her kingdom's wealth, and navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics. Her strategic alliance with Caesar, while beneficial, was also a calculated risk. After Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, Cleopatra had to reassess her political alliances. But that's another chapter in her saga, one that we'll explore as we continue this historical roller coaster. For now, let's pause and appreciate Cleopatra's rise. She wasn't just a queen draped in luxury and romance. She was a formidable leader who understood the harsh realities of power. She used her intellect, charm, and resources to turn the tides in her favor, showing that in the world of ancient politics, it wasn't just about who sat on the throne, but who controlled the narrative and the grain. Cleopatra's story is far from over, and as we delve further, we'll see just how she continued to defy expectations and rewrite the rules of the game. But Cleopatra's story was far from a happily ever after. As the dust settled from Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra found herself at a crossroads, not the kind you find in a rom-com, but more like a scene from House of Cards. The Roman power struggle was heating up faster than a pizza oven, and Cleopatra needed to choose her next ally wisely. Enter Mark Antony, the Roman general with a reputation for hard partying and hard fighting, and the man who would become Cleopatra's next partner in both love and political machinations. Let's set the stage. It's 41 BC, and Mark Antony is one of the 3 rulers of Rome, sharing power with Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, and Lepidus, in what was known as the Second Triumvirate. If you think power-sharing sounds like a peaceful compromise, think again. It was more like a game of Survivor, Roman edition, where alliances were temporary and backstabbing was a legitimate strategy. Antony needed Egypt's resources to fund his military ambitions, and Cleopatra needed a powerful Roman ally to secure her throne. Their partnership was forged in necessity, but it soon became legendary for its passion and drama. Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, and she made quite the entrance. Cleopatra knew the art of spectacle, and she arrived sailing down the Cydnus River on a barge so grand it would make the love boat look like a dinghy. Plutarch tells us the barge was adorned with purple sails and oars tipped with silver, while Cleopatra reclined like a goddess, dressed as Aphrodite. It was a scene straight out of a Hollywood epic, except it was real, and the stakes were life or death, not an Oscar nomination. Their meeting was a success, and Cleopatra and Antony quickly became the power couple of the ancient world. They were like the Brangelina of the 1st century BC, but with more political agendas and fewer paparazzi. Together, they had 3 children, and Cleopatra even named one of their sons Ptolemy Philadelphus, because why not keep the family tradition of confusingly similar names going strong? But their relationship wasn't just about romance. It was an alliance that reshaped the political landscape of the Mediterranean, with Cleopatra using her wealth to support Antony's campaigns and Antony backing Cleopatra's claim to the throne. And here's where things get messy. Fast forward to 31 BC, and the triumvirate is crumbling. Octavian and Antony are on a collision course, and Cleopatra is caught in the middle. The stakes couldn't be higher. Antony and Cleopatra's future, the fate of Egypt, and the control of Rome itself hung in the balance. It all came to a head at the Battle of Actium, a naval clash that was less about swashbuckling pirates and more about cold, hard logistics. Now, let's geek out on the numbers. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet consisted of about 500 ships and 60,000 soldiers, a massive force. but facing Octavian's equally impressive 400 ships and 80,000 troops. The battle took place off the coast of Greece, and it was a high-stakes game of chess on water. Cleopatra's ships, laden with treasure and supplies, were crucial to the war effort, but they were also a floating reminder of what was at stake, the wealth and sovereignty of Egypt. Despite the mythic allure of the battle, the reality was gritty and brutal. Cleopatra and Antony were outmaneuvered by Agrippa, Octavian's admiral, whose strategy turned the tide. Cleopatra, ever pragmatic, saw the writing on the wall and decided to preserve her fleet by breaking through the enemy lines. She retreated, and Antony, torn between his duty and his devotion, followed her. This move has been romanticized as an act of love, but it was also a strategic withdrawal to save what remained of their forces and regroup. The cost of the battle was staggering. Antony's forces suffered heavy losses, with many ships captured or destroyed. Cleopatra's retreat didn't come cheap either. It was a gamble that left their land forces stranded and morale shattered. The aftermath was a logistical and economic nightmare for Antony and Cleopatra. Their once strong position was now precarious, their treasury depleted, and their political support weakening. The romance of Antony and Cleopatra has been etched into legend, but the reality was a complex web of political calculations, economic necessities, and yes, personal passion. Cleopatra was no mere damsel in distress. She was a ruler fighting for her kingdom's survival. Antony was not just a love-struck general, but a seasoned politician trying to secure his legacy. The Battle of Actium was their last stand, a dramatic showdown where myth and reality clashed like titans on the churning sea. And as the storm clouds gathered over Alexandria, Cleopatra and Antony would face their final chapter, one that would cement their place in history as both tragic lovers and shrewd political players. But that's a story for another day, as the saga of Cleopatra's Egypt is far from over. Stay tuned, because the next turn of events will be as unpredictable as the tides of the Nile, and just as inevitable. As the dust of Actium settled, and the Mediterranean waves lapped away the blood of the fallen, Cleopatra and Antony found themselves retreating to Alexandria like two chess players whose endgame was approaching faster than they'd hoped. The year was 31 BC, and with Octavian's forces closing in, the sands of time weren't the only thing slipping through their fingers. Cleopatra's final days were a masterclass in strategic desperation. With Octavian's grip tightening, she had to balance the roles of monarch, mother, and military strategist. Talk about multitasking. Alexandria was a city brimming with potential and peril. It was a stronghold, but also a golden cage. Cleopatra needed a plan, a Hail Mary of ancient proportions. The stakes were as high as the Great Pyramid of Giza, and Cleopatra knew it. She sent emissaries to negotiate with Octavian, but the future Augustus was as cold and calculating as a Roman abacus. Octavian was in it for the long game, and his victory at Actium had given him the upper hand. Cleopatra's attempts to sway him with promises of allegiance or treasure were met with the same steely resolve that would later forge the Roman Empire. Meanwhile, Antony, who had once been a lion of Rome, found himself pacing the corridors of Alexandria, his legions dwindling and his options narrowing. The once mighty general was now besieged by doubt and desertion. Yet, even in these desperate times, Cleopatra's influence could still be felt. She banked on her renowned charm and intellect to rally what support she could, but it was like trying to patch a sinking ship with papyrus. As Octavian's forces approached, Cleopatra and Antony's last stand took on the air of a tragic opera rather than a military campaign. In August 30 BC, Octavian's forces laid siege to Alexandria, and the city braced for its final act. Antony, ever the soldier, made one last attempt to turn the tide, but his forces were outnumbered and outgunned. The dream was over, and reality was closing in like a Roman phalanx. Antony, defeated and disheartened, took his own life, reportedly falling on his sword. Cleopatra, witnessing the fall of her lover and ally, was left to face the music alone. But Cleopatra was never one to just roll over and surrender. She was as defiant as ever, even in the face of overwhelming odds. This is where the legend of Cleopatra takes its most dramatic turn, a narrative so gripping it could give Shakespeare a run for his money. Now, let's tackle the infamous snakebite story. According to legend, Cleopatra chose to end her life by the bite of an asp, a symbolically rich exit that would have made a poetic headline in any ancient tabloid. But let's apply a little modern skepticism to this tale. The truth is, the logistics of smuggling a venomous snake into her quarters are, frankly, a bit questionable. Also, how does one ensure a prompt and painless demise with an asp? It's not like she had a snake charmer on speed dial. More plausible theories suggest she may have used poison, a method more befitting a queen who had mastered the art of subtlety and surprise. Cleopatra was known for her knowledge of potions and poisons. It was practically a requirement for surviving Ptolemaic politics. A discreet vial of fast-acting poison seems a more practical choice for someone of her intellect and cunning. Regardless of the method, Cleopatra's death marked the end of an era. On that fateful day in August, with Alexandria's fate sealed and her kingdom slipping away, Cleopatra made her final, irrevocable move. She was found in her mausoleum, her bodyguard Charmian adjusting the royal diadem on her brow, a final act of defiance and dignity that would echo through the ages. Octavian, ever the spin doctor, quickly seized upon Cleopatra's death to craft his own narrative. He presented her as the seductress who had led noble Roman generals astray, a foreign queen who dared challenge Roman supremacy. It was a convenient story, one that cemented his status as the savior of Rome and justified his actions to the Roman people. Cleopatra's image was reshaped in Roman propaganda as a cautionary tale, a femme fatale whose ambitions were drowned in the Nile along with the hopes of her dynasty. But let's not forget the real Cleopatra, a polyglot, a strategist, a ruler who defied the odds and played the game of thrones with unmatched skill. Her legacy was not merely that of a seductress, but of a sovereign who fought tooth and nail to preserve her kingdom against the juggernaut of Roman expansion. In the wake of her death, Egypt became a Roman province, its wealth and granaries feeding the ambitions of an empire that would span continents. Cleopatra had been the last of the pharaohs, and with her demise, the ancient world shifted on its axis. Rome was now the center of gravity, pulling the Mediterranean world into its orbit. As we assess Cleopatra's impact, we must look beyond the romanticized tales of seduction and betrayal. She was a ruler who understood the power of narrative and the importance of legacy. Her coins, her monuments, her very life were testaments to her ability to shape her own story, even as her enemies sought to rewrite it. Cleopatra's saga is a testament to the enduring power of myth and the harsh realities of history. Her life was a tapestry woven with ambition, intellect, and a fierce will to defy the constraints of her time. As we unravel the threads of her story, we find not just a queen, but a complex human being navigating the tumultuous seas of political intrigue and personal ambition. And while Cleopatra's reign may have ended in tragedy, her influence reverberates through history, challenging us to look beyond the myths and see the woman who dared to defy an empire. But hold that thought, because the story of Cleopatra is far from over. There's one more chapter to unfold, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Stay tuned for the final act of Cleopatra's epic tale, where we'll explore the legacy she left behind and the world she helped shape. Cleopatra's saga didn't fade into obscurity like some dusty relic in the back of a museum. Nope, it exploded into the annals of history with the force of a Roman catapult, leaving a legacy as enigmatic and compelling as the queen herself. First, let's talk about how the Romans really laid it on thick with their posthumous PR campaign. Octavian, ever the savvy politician, spun Cleopatra's tale into a juicy narrative tailor-made for Roman audiences. The exotic siren who dared to challenge the might of Rome, only to be crushed under its sandal-clad heel. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a tabloid hit piece, with Cleopatra cast as a femme fatale who led noble Roman men astray, a narrative that has clung to her like a well-fitted toga. This wasn't just a character assassination, it was a masterstroke of Roman propaganda. By painting Cleopatra as the ultimate threat to Roman virtue, Octavian, soon to be Augustus, Rome's first emperor, could justify his actions to the Senate and the populace. Cleopatra's story became a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when the exotic East entices the disciplined West. It was rhetoric as potent as Cleopatra's own political maneuvers, and it stuck around for centuries. But here's the kicker. Cleopatra's allure only grew with time. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and her story is still being told and retold, from Shakespeare's tragic dramatizations to Hollywood's Technicolor spectacles. Let's not forget that iconic 1963 film, Cleopatra, starring Elizabeth Taylor. With a budget that ballooned to a then astronomical $44 million, about $400 million today, the production mirrored the Queen's own lavish lifestyle. The film was more about Taylor's legendary beauty and off-screen romance with Richard Burton than a factual retelling, but it cemented Cleopatra's image as the ultimate seductress. But why does Cleopatra continue to captivate us? It's not just the romance or the drama, though those are irresistible. Cleopatra embodies a potent mix of intelligence, ambition, and defiance. She was a woman who ruled in a man's world, challenging not just Rome but the gender norms of her time. She wielded power with a finesse that would make even the most seasoned modern politicians take notes. And in an era where women were often relegated to the background, Cleopatra stood front and center, commanding armies, negotiating with emperors, and defending her kingdom's sovereignty. The fascination with Cleopatra also speaks to the power of narrative. Her life was a testament to the idea that history is often written by the victors, but legends are crafted by those who know how to spin a good story. Cleopatra understood this innately. She knew the importance of public image, from her coins bearing her likeness to the grand spectacles she orchestrated. Her life was a blend of theater and politics, a mix of reality and perception. Yet, Cleopatra's story is more than just the sum of her political maneuvers and personal alliances. It raises questions about leadership, gender, and the narratives that shape our understanding of history. Cleopatra was both a political leader and a cultural icon, a figure who challenged the status quo and left a legacy that defies simple categorization. She was a woman who navigated the turbulent waters of power with skill and determination, and her story prompts us to consider who gets to tell the story and how it is told. In examining Cleopatra's legacy, we also see the enduring tension between myth and reality. The romanticized versions of her life, filled with love affairs and dramatic suicides, offer a compelling narrative, but they also obscure the real challenges she faced and the strategic brilliance she displayed. Her story reminds us that history is often a mixture of what happened and what we wish had happened, a tapestry woven with threads of truth, embellishment, and interpretation. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour through Cleopatra's Egypt, let's take a moment to appreciate the complexity of her story. Cleopatra was a ruler who defied easy categorization, a leader who navigated the intersection of gender, power, and narrative with unparalleled skill. She was a woman who understood the power of her own image and used it to forge a legacy that continues to captivate us, challenging us to look beyond the myths and see the multifaceted human being at the heart of the legend. Cleopatra's life and reign offer enduring lessons about the nature of power, the challenges of leadership, and the stories that define us. In a world where narratives often overshadow reality, Cleopatra stands as a reminder of the importance of questioning the tales we are told and the images we are shown. Her legacy is a testament to the complexity of human ambition and the timeless allure of a well-spun story. As we close the chapter on Cleopatra and her remarkable life, let's not forget the woman behind the legend, a ruler who dared to challenge the might of Rome, a strategist who played the game of power with unmatched skill, and a figure whose story continues to echo through the corridors of history. Cleopatra may have been the last pharaoh of Egypt, but her legacy endures, a testament to the enduring power of narrative and the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be defined by anyone but herself. And as we turn the page on this chapter of history, we are reminded that the allure of Cleopatra's story lies not just in its romance or its tragedy, but in the complexity and resilience of the queen who inspired it. If you think being a Viking explorer meant living the dream of endless adventure, think again. Sure, the image of a rugged seafarer slicing through the misty seas aboard a dragon-headed longship sounds romantic, but let's peel back the layers of myth and gaze at the gritty truth. Welcome to the world where muscle and brawn met Mother Nature head-on. Daily life was more survival than saga, and every Viking tale began with a diet that would make even the most adventurous foodie cringe. First, let's tackle the culinary delights, or lack thereof, of a Viking explorer. Forget the lavish feasts you see in TV dramas. These folks were more about consuming whatever wouldn't kill them. Their diet was a mix of dried fish, tough barley bread, and for a touch of colour, bland porridge. They washed it down with mead or ale, which was more about masking the taste of questionable water than getting a buzz. Fresh fruits and vegetables were as rare as a dragon sighting, and were mostly available during short Scandinavian summers. And let's not forget the star of the Viking menu, herring. This oily fish was a staple, but after a few weeks at sea, even the most dedicated Viking warrior would start to eye it suspiciously. Now, imagine living conditions that would make a cramped studio apartment look like a palace. Viking explorers spent much of their time on longships, which were more utilitarian than comfortable. These boats were about 65 to 75 feet long and about 15 feet wide, designed for speed and agility, not relaxation. Picture yourself sitting on a hard wooden bench, getting splashed by icy seawater, and having the luxury of a single reindeer hide for warmth. No cabins, no privacy, and definitely no onboard spa. If you wanted to sleep, you curled up wherever you could, often exposed to the elements. Rain, wind, or snow didn't stop for a Viking's nap time. And speaking of elements, let's talk about the constant threat of raiding parties. Life as a Viking explorer wasn't just about voyages of discovery. When they weren't braving the high seas, they were dealing with the constant fear of being raided themselves. While the Vikings are famous for their own raiding exploits, they were just as vulnerable to attacks from rival clans. It was a dog-eat-dog world, where being caught off guard could cost you your life, or worse, your ship. You had to be ready to defend what little you had at a moment's notice, often with nothing more than a rusty axe and a prayer to Odin. The longships themselves, while engineering marvels for their time, were far from luxury liners. Built mostly from oak and held together by iron nails, these ships could carry about 60 men. They were designed to be fast and shallow, perfect for sneaking up on unassuming coastal villages or navigating narrow rivers. However, this design meant that you felt every wave and every gust of wind. Seasickness was a common companion, and there wasn't a peppermint tea in sight to settle your stomach. The absence of a keel made them easy to beach, but also easy to capsize. A storm could turn a seasoned sailor's hair white faster than you can say Ragnarok. Now, why would anyone choose this life? The short answer, necessity. Scandinavia in the Viking Age wasn't exactly a land of milk and honey. With limited arable land and a growing population, the Norse people needed to look beyond their fjords for resources. This meant setting sail, braving the North Atlantic, and hoping to find greener pastures, or at least ones with fewer rocks. It was a choice between the devil you knew and the unknown, and for many, the lure of potential riches and new lands was worth the risk. In the end, while the legend of the Viking explorer is one of fearsome warriors and epic conquests, the reality was far less glamorous. It was a life of hardship, where nature was both a provider and a relentless foe. The next time you see a Viking movie, remember that behind the impressive beards and fearsome battle cries were people who ate questionable fish, slept on wet planks, and lived in constant readiness for battle. It's a life that built legends, but it wasn't quite the dream job posting you might think. And speaking of hardship, let's dive into the economic pressures that turned Vikings into reluctant explorers. Scandinavia around the 8th to 11th centuries wasn't exactly a paradise of prosperity. Imagine a landscape where arable land was as limited as a Wi-Fi signal in the middle of nowhere. The soil was rocky, the growing season short, and the population was on the uptick. So when your livelihood depends on farming, and that farming is as fruitful as a New Year's resolution, you start looking for alternatives. Cue the Viking raids, a solution born out of sheer desperation. Forget the romantic notion of these Norse warriors setting sail purely for plunder and glory. This was about survival, plain and simple. The economic conditions of Scandinavia pushed these folks to seek wealth elsewhere, because, frankly, home wasn't cutting it. The Viking expeditions were not just about pillaging monasteries for silver and gold. They were also about securing trade routes and finding new lands to settle. It was a matter of expanding horizons, both literally and figuratively. Now, let's talk about the cold, hard cash, or the lack thereof, required to launch one of these legendary expeditions. Outfitting a longship was no small feat. The cost of building a single ship could run anywhere from 16 to 18 cows worth of resources, and that's without the in-flight meal. You needed skilled craftsmen to construct these vessels, and the materials, oak wood, iron nails, and tar, didn't come cheap. Not to mention, you had to provision the ship with food, weapons, and a crew willing to spend weeks smelling like each other's armpits. And speaking of crew, these weren't mercenaries living large on a share of the loot. The financial risk was immense. Each man on board had to chip in to cover the costs, and there was no guarantee of a profitable return. It was a bit like gambling in Vegas, only with worse odds and no complimentary cocktails. The romanticized image of treasure-laden raids is a bit misleading. Wealth distribution was more about necessity than luxury. If the expedition was successful, sure, you might come back with some shiny trinkets and a few stories to tell. But just as often, you returned with nothing but a sunburn and lice. The harsh economic reality meant that many Vikings went a-Viking. Yeah, it's a verb, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. It was a life filled with financial pressures and the ever-looming spectre of economic ruin. And while the allure of discovering new lands and untold riches might have been appealing, the reality was a cycle of debt and risk. You see, the Vikings didn't just raid, they traded. They established trade networks that stretched from the Byzantine Empire to the shores of North America, peddling everything from walrus ivory to exotic slaves. Even the so-called great treasures they raided were often just the necessities of life. The famed Viking hoards, packed with silver coins and jewelry, were more like a rainy day fund than a jackpot. And when it came to raiding, they were just as likely to take livestock and grain as they were to grab gold. And while the legend of the Vikings is one of daring and adventure, the truth is that they were just trying to make ends meet in a world that was less about conquest and more about commerce. In the grand scheme, the Viking expeditions were an economic necessity born from a harsh homeland that offered little in the way of comfort or resources. They were driven by the need to survive, to find new opportunities in a world that was as unforgiving as it was vast. And while the myth of the Viking warrior persists, it's important to remember the real motivations behind their voyages, a need to escape the constraints of their environment and seek a better life, no matter the cost. So, while the Vikings were busy ransacking monasteries and trading walrus tusks, the political landscape was more cutthroat than a Game of Thrones family reunion. Picture a world where alliances were as fickle as a teenage romance, and rivalries were often settled with an axe, not a handshake. Welcome to the Viking Age, where political savvy was as crucial as a sturdy longship. First, let's talk about alliances. Viking expeditions weren't just solo ventures by a group of burly guys with bad haircuts. These were carefully orchestrated affairs that required the right political backing. Alliances could mean the difference between a successful raid and a disastrous failure. For instance, the Norse chieftain Rollo, whose descendants would go on to become the Dukes of Normandy, knew this well. By pledging allegiance to the French King Charles the Simple in 911, he secured land in what would become Normandy, a strategic move that ensured his people a place to settle and thrive, rather than return to the rocky Scandinavian soil. It's a classic case of, if you can't beat them, join them, and then take over. These alliances were often sealed with oaths, marriages, or gifts, because who doesn't love a good bribe? But they were as stable as a longship in a storm. At the drop of a horned helmet, yesterday's ally could become tomorrow's enemy. Take the famed Viking leader, Harald Hardrada. He spent years in exile after losing a battle in Norway, only to return with a vengeance, forming alliances that would ultimately make him King of Norway in 1046. His rise was a testament to the political chess game that defined Viking leadership. Alliances were less about lifelong friendships and more about strategic moves on the ever-shifting board of power. Now, aboard a Viking ship, social dynamics were as complex as a Norse knot. Forget the egalitarian image of a band of brothers. These ships were floating microcosms of the social hierarchy back home. At the top was the ship's captain, often a jarl or a wealthy freeman, responsible for making crucial decisions like plotting the course or deciding when to raid or retreat. His word was law, and disobedience could land you in a heap of trouble or overboard. Below him were the warriors, who might share in the spoils if the expedition was successful. But don't be fooled into thinking they were all equal. There were hierarchies within hierarchies, with the most experienced fighters commanding more respect and a bigger share of the loot. At the bottom of the pecking order were the thralls, slaves who had as much say in ship matters as a barnacle. Their job was to do the grunt work, like rowing or cooking, and praying they didn't end up as collateral damage during a raid. Power struggles were as common as seasickness. The title of King of the Vikings wasn't just handed out to the guy with the best beard. It was a title won through blood, sweat, and more than a few betrayals. Take the infamous Ragnar Lothbrok, a legendary Norse hero whose life was a roller coaster of raids, rivalries, and eventual martyrdom in a pit of snakes. His story, while romanticized, highlights the reality of Viking leadership. It was volatile, dangerous, and highly competitive. The political machinations didn't just stop at internal Viking squabbles. Their expeditions had a lasting impact on European politics, reshaping borders and influencing power dynamics. The Viking raids on England, for example, were more than just smash-and-grab operations. They destabilized the existing Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, paving the way for Danish rule. King Canute the Great, a Viking chieftain-turned-king, ruled over a North Sea empire that included England, Denmark, and Norway in the early 11th century, demonstrating the Vikings' impact was as far-reaching as their longships. These power plays weren't without their risks. A failed alliance or a botched raid could lead to disastrous consequences. Just ask Harold Hardrada, whose ambition led him to claim the English throne in 1066, only to meet his end at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. It was a stark reminder that in the Viking world, the line between victory and defeat was as thin as a sword's edge. As for their long-lasting impact, the Vikings didn't just raid and leave. They settled and assimilated. Their influence can still be seen today in the languages, cultures, and place names across Europe. Just think of all the Thorpe and by ending towns in England, thank the Vikings for those. They left a legacy that was more than tales of pillage and plunder. It was a story of cultural exchange and adaptation. In this world of shifting alliances and power struggles, Viking explorers weren't just seafarers. They were diplomats, warriors, and sometimes reluctant settlers, navigating a world as tumultuous as the seas they sailed. The political landscape of the Viking Age was a tapestry woven with ambition, betrayal, and the occasional strategic marriage, all contributing to the legend of the Viking explorer. And while the image of a fearsome raider may persist in popular culture, the reality was a complex dance of power that required as much cunning as it did courage. Stay tuned, because the Viking saga is far from over. Ah, the Viking saga, an endless loop of adventure, danger, and let's be honest, a fair share of misery. But while the political chess games and economic pressures might have driven these Norsemen to set sail, it was the psychological warfare that truly tested their mettle. Imagine the emotional roller coaster of being a Viking explorer. One moment you're braving the North Atlantic's icy wrath, and the next, you're missing your fjordside home like a college freshman on their first night away. Let's dive into the psyche of these seafaring souls. The stress levels aboard a Viking longship would rival any modern-day Wall Street trading floor. They faced constant danger, storms that could flip their shallow vessels like pancakes, rival clans itching for a fight, and the ever-present specter of disease. Picture being trapped in a wooden box with 60 of your closest friends, each one armed and possibly seasick. Interpersonal conflicts. Oh, they had those in spades. Think of it like Survivor, Viking edition, except the prize was just making it back alive. The homesickness, as real as a Viking's beard. When you spend months at sea, the longing for home becomes a constant companion, haunting every creak of the ship's hull. Letters weren't an option, and messages in bottles. Forget it. These explorers were cut off from their families for months, sometimes years. They carried with them the sagas and myths of their people, epic tales of gods and heroes that served as both a comfort and a cruel reminder of what they left behind. Speaking of myths, let's debunk a few. The legendary Viking sagas, while inspiring, set some pretty unrealistic expectations. Stories of mighty warriors and magical lands painted exploration as a noble quest, a chance to earn glory and gold. But reality dealt a harsher hand. Life at sea was more about survival than saga. The legends didn't mention the lice infestations or the scurvy that could leave you toothless as a baby. The Viking explorers were like the original Instagram influencers, living a life that seemed glamorous from afar, but was fraught with hardship up close. The sagas told tales of honor and bravery, but they conveniently skipped over the bits about frostbite and relentless boredom. Hours spent staring at an endless expanse of grey waves can make even the most hardened warrior question their life choices. Then there's the isolation, which hit hard. Imagine being surrounded by people but feeling utterly alone. It's a loneliness that goes beyond mere physical separation. It's the isolation of knowing that each wave could be your last, that your fate is tied to the whims of nature and the decisions of your fellow sailors. This wasn't just emotional fatigue, it was existential dread wrapped in a fur cloak. Now, the Vikings weren't completely without coping mechanisms. They had their guards, Odin, Thor, Freya, who provided comfort and a sense of purpose. They performed rituals and made sacrifices to curry favor with these deities, hoping for safe passage and successful raids. But faith is a double-edged sword. When things went wrong, it wasn't just bad luck. It was a sign that the gods were displeased. Talk about pressure. And let's not forget the influence of the sagas themselves. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were cultural cornerstones. They shaped the Vikings' worldview, offering a framework for understanding their place in the cosmos. But they also set a high bar for heroism and success. How do you measure up to a legend when you're just trying to avoid a watery grave? The interpersonal dynamics on these voyages added another layer of tension. When you're stuck in close quarters with the same group of people, small annoyances can escalate into major conflicts. A sideways glance or a misplaced comment could spark a feud as fiery as a Viking funeral. And with no HR department to mediate, disputes were settled the old-fashioned way, with brute force or grudging silence. The reality was that Viking exploration was as much about managing egos and expectations as it was about navigating uncharted waters. The longships might have been marvels of engineering, but they were also pressure cookers of human emotion. The path to glory was paved with more than just bravery. It was lined with the bones of those who couldn't handle the psychological toll. In the end, the Viking explorer's life was a balancing act of myth and reality, a constant struggle to reconcile their romantic ideals with the brutal truths of life at sea. While their sagas live on, the true stories of these explorers, filled with fear, longing, and raw resilience, paint a picture that's far less glamorous but infinitely more human. As we sail into the next part of this tale, let's keep in mind that the Vikings, for all their legendary feats, were people caught between worlds, yearning for home even as they carved out new ones. Stay tuned, the saga continues. But here's the kicker. Despite the hardships and the harsh realities, the legacy of Viking exploration is as enduring as it is fascinating. See, the Vikings weren't just marauding barbarians with a penchant for plunder. They were pioneers, traders, and cultural conduits who left a profound mark on the world. Their longships, for instance, were an engineering marvel of the age. These sleek vessels, with their shallow drafts and symmetrical bows, could navigate both open seas and narrow rivers with ease, an innovation that allowed the Norsemen to reach far-flung lands and influence them profoundly. Now, let's talk about the ripple effect of these voyages. The Vikings didn't just leave a trail of pillaged monasteries in their wake. They sowed the seeds of cultural exchange across Europe and beyond. Take the Viking settlement in Greenland, established by Eric the Red around 985 AD. It might not have been the tropical paradise its name suggests, more like a frozen diet retreat, but it was a crucial stepping stone for later explorations. From there, Eric's son, Leif Erikson, would famously stumble upon North America, nearly 500 years before Columbus, landing in what is now Newfoundland, Canada. This brief Norse presence in North America, while not a lasting settlement, highlights their audacious spirit of exploration. And let's not forget the Vikings' impact on the British Isles. Their raids and later settlements in areas like York and Dublin turned these cities into thriving trade hubs, blending Norse and local cultures. The Danelaw, a swath of England under Viking control, was a testament to their influence. Here, the Vikings didn't just conquer, they integrated, intermarrying and infusing their language and customs into the local populace. Ever heard the English word, sky? Thank a Viking for that linguistic loan. The Vikings were also adept traders, establishing networks that stretched from the Middle East to the fringes of the Arctic. They traded everything from furs and amber to slaves and falcons, acting as the connective tissue of medieval trade routes. Their reach extended as far as Constantinople, where Viking mercenaries known as the Varangian Guard served the Byzantine emperors. These warriors swapped tales and tactics, further spreading Norse influence across continents. But let's debunk the myth of the Vikings as untamed savages. In truth, they were as much about commerce as conquest. Archaeological finds in places like York have unearthed a trove of artifacts, from combs and tools to exquisite jewelry, suggesting a society that valued craftsmanship and trade alongside warfare. Their runestones, left behind in places like Sweden, tell stories of voyages, commerce, and family ties, offering a more nuanced view of Viking life. The technological innovations of the Vikings were not limited to ships and swords. Their approach to navigation was revolutionary. Without compasses, they relied on landmarks, stars, and the sun to guide their journeys. They even used a sunstone, crystal, to determine the sun's position on cloudy days, a trick that would make any modern-day sailor envious. This ingenuity allowed them to traverse vast and treacherous waters, reaching destinations that seemed impossible for the time. So, what lessons can we glean from these Norse navigators? For starters, the Vikings teach us about resilience and adaptability. Despite the odds, they ventured into the unknown, driven by necessity and curiosity. Their voyages were not just about survival, but about finding new opportunities in an ever-expanding world. They remind us that history is shaped by those daring enough to push the boundaries, even when the outcome is uncertain. And yet, the romantic image of the Viking, a fearless warrior, a noble explorer, still captivates our imagination. Perhaps it's the allure of adventure, the idea of charting a course where none existed, that keeps their legend alive. It's a narrative that speaks to the human spirit, a testament to our innate desire to discover and understand the world around us. In reflecting on their legacy, it's clear that the Vikings were more than the sum of their raids. They were a dynamic force of cultural and technological exchange, their influence reverberating through time. The sagas they left behind, while embellished with myth, offer a glimpse into their world, a world that was as complex and multifaceted as the people who inhabited it. So, the next time you envision a Viking, think beyond the horned helmet, a myth, by the way, and consider the enduring impact of their explorations. They were more than marauders. They were bridge builders, connecting disparate cultures through trade, technology, and tales. The real story of the Vikings is one of innovation and integration, of a people who, despite the odds, left an indelible mark on history. In the end, the Vikings remind us that history is not just about grand conquests or legendary heroes, but about the everyday struggles and achievements that shape the course of human events. Their legacy, like the sea they sailed, is vast and deep, a testament to the enduring power of exploration and the human spirit. As we close this chapter on Viking exploration, remember that behind every legend lies a kernel of truth, and it's the blend of myth and reality that keeps history alive and endlessly fascinating. All right, so you're an Athenian in the early 5th century BC, just minding your own business, probably wondering if olives or grapes would make a better investment this year, when BAM, you're suddenly thrust into the chaos of the Persian Wars. You didn't sign up for this, but here we are. The Persian Wars didn't start with a bang, but more like a diplomatic whisper that quickly escalated into a giant mess. You see, the Persians, led by the ambitious King Darius I, had this little problem with overreach. Their empire was so vast, it made the Mediterranean look like a small backyard pool. They controlled everything from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, and their appetite for expansion was the stuff of legend, or nightmares, depending on which side you were on. Now, let's talk about the Ionian Revolt, the spark that lit the fuse of this historical firecracker. It's around 499 BC, and the cities of Ionia, which are Greek but under Persian thumb, decide they've had enough of being the empire's doormat. They revolt, and who do they call for backup? That's right, your neighbors in Athens. You, as an Athenian, receive a desperate message from the Ionians saying, "Hey, we've got a little rebellion going on here. Could you lend us a hand?" At first, Athens is like, thanks, but no thanks. We've got our own issues to deal with. But then, maybe it's the spirit of democracy or the allure of sticking it to a massive empire, but Athens decides, why not? So, you and your fellow Athenians send a fleet of 20 triremes to aid the Ionian cause. Now, 20 ships might not sound like much against the Persian juggernaut, but hey, it's the thought that counts, right? The revolt kicks off with some initial success. You even manage to burn down the city of Sardis, which is kind of a big deal. But here's the kicker. The whole thing goes south pretty quickly. The Persians regroup, and by 493 BC, they've crushed the revolt, leaving you and your fellow Athenians in a precarious position. Essentially, you've just poked a bear, a giant, heavily armed bear with an empire at its command. Now, King Darius isn't exactly the forgive and forget type. He's got a memory like an elephant and an ego to match. So, when he hears about Athens' involvement, he doesn't just shrug it off. Instead, he reportedly instructs one of his servants to remind him daily, "Master, remember the Athenians." This isn't a post-it note on the fridge, this is personal. Back home in Athens, there's a mix of disbelief and nervous laughter. I mean, who do you think you are taking on the Persian Empire? Your city-state isn't exactly known for its military might, at least not yet. But here's the thing, nobody told you that. So, you're in it now, and the whole city is buzzing with a mix of fear and weirdly misplaced optimism. By 492 BC, Darius has had enough. He launches a campaign to punish Athens and its little buddy Eretria for their meddling. But the first expedition is a bit of a fiasco. A storm wrecks the Persian fleet off the coast of Mount Athos, and it's a classic case of oops, did we forget to check the weather? Undeterred, Darius tries again in 490 BC, sending a force directly across the Aegean. This time, it's serious. The Persians land at Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. It's like they're saying, we can see your Acropolis from here. Now, the Athenians, led by the general Miltiades, have a decision to make. Do you wait for the Persians to march to your doorstep, or do you take the fight to them? Spoiler, you decide on the latter. In a bold move, the Athenians charge the Persian forces at Marathon. It's a literal run for your lives, and somehow, against all odds, you win. The Persians, caught off guard by your audacity and speed, are defeated. The victory at Marathon isn't just a military success, it's a statement. Little Athens has stood up to the mightiest empire of the time and lived to tell the tale. Back home, it's like the ultimate underdog story. Everyone's in the agora, swapping stories about how they saw the Persians run, and it's a morale boost like no other. But let's not kid ourselves. You know this isn't the end. Darius might have been thwarted, but the Persian Empire is like Hydra from Greek mythology. Cut off one head, and another takes its place. The threat isn't over. You've bought yourself time and a bit of breathing room, but the shadow of Persia still looms large. You're just getting started on what will become an epic struggle for survival, identity, and let's face it, a bit of glory. So, as you head home, probably aching from the battle, and wondering if you'll ever get the smell of sweat and fear out of your tunic, you realize you're part of something bigger. The Persian Wars are just beginning, and you're smack dab in the middle of it all. Buckle up, because the ride is far from over. So, as you limp back to Athens, still riding the adrenaline high from the Battle of Marathon, it hits you. You've just stood toe-to-toe with the Persian Empire and lived to tell the tale. It's like David just killed Goliath with a slingshot made from recycled sandals. Speaking of which, let's talk about your footwear. The Athenians weren't exactly rocking Nikes at Marathon. No, you were probably wearing a pair of homemade sandals, which, let's be honest, were more suited for a stroll around the agora than a full-on sprint across a battlefield. Yet somehow, you made it work. Now, the Battle of Marathon wasn't just about who had the best shoes. It was about strategy, guts, and a little bit of ancient Greek luck. Your leader, Miltiades, decided to ditch the traditional hoplite phalanx formation in favor of a new tactic. He thinned out the center of your lines and reinforced the flanks, which, to put it simply, is like betting the farm on your sidekicks while hoping the middle holds up. It's a risky move, but hey, fortune favors the bold, right? When the Persian forces, complete with their fancy gear and war elephants, okay, maybe not war elephants, but definitely the ancient equivalent of a military parade, charged in, they didn't expect your flanking maneuver. It was an ancient twist ending that Shyamalan would approve of. The Persians found themselves surrounded, and despite their numerical superiority, estimates put them at around 25,000 soldiers to your 10,000. Your strategy paid off. The Persians lost about 400 men, while you only lost 192. Not exactly the kind of math they were expecting. Now, let's address that infamous run. Legend has it that a messenger named Pheidipides ran all the way from Marathon to Athens, about 26 miles, to announce the victory before promptly dropping dead. It's a tale that's as inspiring as it is tragic, and it's where we get the modern marathon race. But here's the kicker. Herodotus, our main man on the scene, doesn't even mention Pheidipide's run to Athens in his account. Instead, he tells us about a run from Athens to Sparta, a cool 150 miles, before the battle to ask for help, which is impressive enough to earn a pair of golden sandals. So, is the famous marathon run a bit of myth-making? Quite possibly. But like a good story, it's got legs, no pun intended. You can see why the Athenians might lean into this narrative. It turns a military victory into an epic tale of endurance and sacrifice, perfect for inspiring future generations, and conveniently, for boosting morale at home. Speaking of home, while you're busy celebrating, the Athenian economy is doing a little dance of its own. Winning battles is great for business. Victory means stability, and stability means trade. With the Persian threat temporarily at bay, you can focus on rebuilding and fortifying. Athens starts to look like that heart investment you wisely decided to double down on. Olive exports are up, and the agora is buzzing with merchants hawking everything from pottery to, yes, more sandals. The economic boost is real, and it's one of those times when the phrase, winning is everything, actually holds water. But let's not get too comfy. The Persian Empire is still out there, licking its wounds and plodding. Just because Darius is momentarily out of the picture doesn't mean he's gone for good. His son Xerxes is waiting in the wings, and spoiler alert, he's not exactly the type to let bygones be bygones. Back in Athens, the victory at Marathon has turned Miltiades into a local hero. Suddenly, everyone wants to be his best friend, or at least be seen at the same symposium. But fame is a fickle friend, and politics in Athens is a blood sport. Miltiades will soon find out that today's hero can be tomorrow's scapegoat. But that's a story for another day. For now, you're riding high on a wave of newfound confidence. Your city-state, with its penchant for theatre and philosophy, has shown that it can also flex some serious military muscle when it needs to. The Battle of Marathon has become a symbol of Athenian resilience and ingenuity, a story that will be told and retold, embellished and mythologized, until it's hard to tell where the truth ends and the legend begins. As you head to the agora, the tales of the battle already taking on a life of their own, you can't help but wonder what the future holds. Will Athens continue to defy the odds, or will the Persian shadow darken your doorstep once more? One thing's for sure, you're in for one heck of a historical ride, and this chapter is far from closed. With the tales of Marathon still echoing in the agora, you're probably thinking, what's next? Well, let me introduce you to the sequel that no one asked for but everyone got, the Battle of Thermopylae. It's 480 BC, and Athens, fresh off its victory high, is about to face a new Persian wave. Enter Xerxes, son of Darius, sporting a grudge the size of his empire. Like a villain in a toga, Xerxes is gearing up for round two, and he's not coming alone. This time, he's bringing a reportedly jaw-dropping army of about 100, 000 to 150, 000 soldiers, although Herodotus, never one to shy away from a bit of hyperbole, claims it was closer to 2 million. Spoiler alert. Historians later rolled their eyes at those numbers, but hey, who's counting? Enter stage left, the Spartans. Now, if you've got a soft spot for tales of macho bravado and leather skirts, armor, this is where things get spicy. The Persians are marching south, and Greece is scrambling. The city-states are like a dysfunctional family reunion, bickering over who brought the best wine while an uninvited guest is at the door. But eventually, they decide that the narrow pass at Thermopylae, a choke point as snug as a pair of ancient Greek sandals, is the perfect spot to make a stand. Now, let's debunk a myth sharper than a Spartan spear. Everyone's heard about the 300 Spartans, but surprise, surprise, they weren't alone. Yeah, it's a bit of a bummer if you love a good underdog story, but history is rarely that tidy. Those 300 were part of a coalition force of around 7,000 Greeks. Think of it like an ancient Avengers assemble, minus the CGI. The Spartans did have a starring role, but this was very much a team effort. The man with the plan was King Leonidas of Sparta, a leader with a penchant for dramatic last stands. The strategy was simple. Hold the pass and make the Persians pay dearly for every inch of ground. It's essentially the military equivalent of you shall not pass, and it worked, at least for a while. For 2 days, the Greeks held their ground, using the narrow pass to neutralize the Persians' numerical advantage. It was like watching a rugby scrum, only with spears, shields, and some serious sunburn. The Persians, likely expecting a Greek retreat, were instead treated to a masterclass in harp-like warfare. The Greeks fought in tight formations, their shields larked, their spears thrust forward. Imagine a human porcupine with an attitude problem. But then came the twist. Every epic tale needs one. Enter Ephialtes, a name destined for infamy. This local shepherd decided that betraying his fellow Greeks was a solid retirement plan, and tipped off Xerxes about a secret path around the pass. Thanks to this traitorous tip-off, the Persians were able to outflank the Greek forces. Leonidas, realizing the jig was up, sent most of his troops away to fight another day, while he and his 300 Spartans, along with a few hundred Thespians and Thebans, stayed to make a last stand. Now, this is where the legend gets its leather-bound luster. Outnumbered and outflanked, the Spartans fought to the last man. It's the kind of story that makes for a killer campfire tale, complete with chest-thumping heroism and noble sacrifice. It's no wonder it's been retold countless times, often with a few embellishments thrown in for good measure. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just about glory. It was also about buying time for the rest of Greece to prepare for the inevitable Persian advance. The economic realities of the time were just as stark as the battle itself. For many Greek city-states, war wasn't just a matter of survival. It was a financial burden. Fielding an army meant leaving your fields untended, your shops unguarded, and your olive oil unpressed. The cost of armor and weapons was no small change. A single bronze harp-light shield could set you back a small fortune. But the stakes were high, and for the Greeks, the alternative, Persian domination, was a non-starter. Back in Athens, the mood was tense. The naval strategy was also key to the Greek defense, and the Athenians had invested heavily in their fleet. Themistocles, the Athenian general known for his cunning, had been pushing for a strong navy for years, and now was his time to shine. The Greek fleet, consisting of about 300 triremes, was stationed at Artemisium, ready to cut off the Persian supply lines. The Athenians knew that control of the seas could make or break their resistance, and they weren't about to let Xerxes sail into history unchallenged. Thermopylae was, in many ways, a strategic delay, a chance for the Greeks to regroup and for Athens to brace itself. The battle wasn't just about numbers, but about buying time and making a statement. It was a show of defiance, a reminder that even against overwhelming odds, the Greeks would not go quietly into that good night. So, as you stand in the agora, listening to the latest news from the front, you can't help but feel a mix of dread and admiration. Sure, the Spartans' last stand might not have saved Greece, but it gave you something just as valuable, hope, and maybe, just maybe, a fighting chance. As the waves of history crash against the shores of Greece, you realize that the Persian wars are far from over. This is just the beginning of a saga that will test your mettle, your wits, and your ability to navigate the turbulent waters of geopolitics. The shadow of Xerxes' army looms large, and the fate of Greece hangs in the balance. But one thing's for sure, you're in the thick of it, and this story is only getting started. Just as the dust, or more accurately, the sea spray from Thermopylae settles, you realize that the real showdown is about to take place on water, where the Greeks are about to turn the tide, literally, at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BC. Picture this. You've just watched the land battle turn into a valiant, albeit tragic, last stand, and now you're about to witness some high-stakes naval drama that would make any ancient Greek playwright salivate. So, let's dive into the deep blue sea of strategy and seamanship. The Greek fleet, led by the ever-calculating Themistocles, is poised to take on Xerxes' armada. Now, we're talking about a Persian fleet that supposedly numbered around 200 ships, though Herodotus might have been sipping too much of the local wine when he jotted that down. Not to be outdone, the Greek coalition musters about 370 triremes. Yep, it's David V.S. Goliath Maritime Edition. Let's talk triremes. These sleek, fast ships were the Pharaohs of the ancient world. Each one was manned by 170 rowers stacked in 3 tiers. Forget your modern-day rowing machines. This was the cross-fit of ancient Greece. Picture yourself as one of those rowers, muscles straining, sweat pouring, and the rhythmic stroke, echoing across the water. Your workout playlist, the inspiring shouts of your commander. The cost of building and maintaining these floating fortresses was no small change. A single trireme could set you back around 1 talent of silver, which, at the time, was roughly the annual salary of 170 rowers. The economic strain was real, But the Athenians were banking on their navy as their savior, and they were all in. Athenian society was like a well-oiled machine, with the silver mines at Laurium churning out the necessary funds to keep those triremes afloat. Now, let's not gloss over the political backstabbing. Themistocles, the mastermind behind the Athenian naval strategy, was as cunning as they come. He convinced the Athenians to use their newfound wealth to build a fleet instead of distributing it among citizens. Imagine the town hall meeting. Do we want silver in our pockets or victory on the seas? Spoiler, they chose the latter. Themistocles knew that the fight against Persia wasn't just a land battle. It was a war for the control of the Aegean. As the Persian fleet approaches, Themistocles pulls a card straight out of the playbook of psychological warfare. He sends a secret message to Xerxes, suggesting that the Greeks are in disarray and ready to flee. Xerxes, perhaps a bit too eager for his own good, takes the bait and sails into the narrow straits of Salamis, thinking he'll catch the Greeks with their togas down. It's a classic case of oops, I did it again, where hubris meets strategy. The battle itself is a chaotic ballet of ships, oars, and ramming tactics. The Greeks, familiar with their own backyard, use the narrow straits to their advantage. The larger Persian ships struggle to maneuver, and it's like watching a sumo wrestler trying to dance ballet, awkward, cumbersome, and ultimately doomed. The Greek triremes, nimble and well-coordinated, slice through the Persian fleet like a hot knife through baklava. In the thick of battle, it's not just about brute strength. The Greeks employ clever tactics, like the deepless, a maneuver where they row straight at the enemy, then suddenly veer to the side to break the enemy's oars before attacking from behind. It's the naval equivalent of a sucker punch, and it works brilliantly. The Persians are caught off guard, their ships colliding with each other in the chaos. At the end of the day, the Greeks emerge victorious, having sunk about 200 Persian ships. The cost to the Persian fleet is devastating, both in terms of material and morale. For Xerxes, it's a bitter pill to swallow. His grand invasion plan is unraveling faster than his best-laid silk robes. Back on the economic front, the victory at Salamis is a financial windfall for Athens. Control of the sea means control of trade routes, and with the Persian threat at bay, the Athenian economy is poised for a boom. The shipyards are bustling, the agora is lively, and olive oil exports are through the roof. The Athenians can practically taste the prosperity that peace and naval supremacy promise. But before you pop the celebratory amphora of wine, remember that Athens' political landscape is as treacherous as the seas. Themistocles, despite his brilliance, is a polarizing figure. Rival politicians are sharpening their daggers, metaphorically of course, biding their time to take him down a peg. In Athens, the line between hero and exile is as thin as a Spartan's patience for diplomacy. So there you have it, a tale of cunning, courage, and a whole lot of rowing. The Battle of Salamis isn't just a military triumph. It's a testament to Greek ingenuity and the power of a well-laid plan. As you stroll through the bustling streets of Athens, you can't help but feel a swell of pride. You've not only survived a Persian onslaught, but have turned the tide of history itself. Yet, even as you bask in the glow of this triumph, you know the story is far from over. The Persian Empire, though wounded, is far from defeated. The war has shifted, but the stakes remain as high as ever. You're left wondering what new challenges lie ahead, and whether Athens, with all its newfound confidence and naval might, can withstand the tests of time and politics lurking just over the horizon. With Athens basking in its naval glory, you'd think the Greeks could finally kick back and toast to their success with some well-deserved wine. But alas, history's got other plans, because while the sea battle of Salamis was a game-changer, the Persian threat was still very much alive on land. Cue the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC, the grand finale in this ancient blockbuster series. The Persian forces, led by the general Mardonius, were still hanging around Greece like an unwanted guest who just won't take the hint. After Xerxes hightailed it back to Persia, leaving Mardonius to clean up the mess, the stage was set for one last showdown. The Greeks, finally putting their differences aside, at least temporarily, mustered an impressive force of about 100,000 men. This was a veritable who's who of Greek city-states, all united under the banner of freedom. Well, sort of. Let's not forget that Greek unity was about as stable as a table with only 3 legs. The Greeks were led by the Spartan regent Pausanias, a man known for his tactical prowess, and later for his tragic fall from grace. But we'll get to that drama later. For now, know that Pausanias had a plan. The Greeks took up a defensive position near the town of Plataea, using the rugged terrain to their advantage. It was like Thermopylae, too. 0, but this time. The Greeks actually had the numbers and a decent supply line. Mardonius, on the other hand, was itching for a fight. He had about 120,000 troops at his disposal, and he was confident that his cavalry would turn the tide. But confidence, as history often teaches us, can be as blinding as a sandstorm. The Persians made the first move, trying to cut off the Greek supply lines. Pausanias, however, wasn't about to let his men starve into submission. He ordered a strategic withdrawal to higher ground, a move that left the Persians scratching their heads and probably cursing under their breaths. The battle itself was a brutal affair, a mix of skirmishes, cavalry charges, and some good old-fashioned hand-to-hand combat. The Greeks, with their superior armor and discipline, held their ground. When the final clash came, it was the hoplites, those heavily armed foot soldiers, who made the difference. The Persians, used to fighting lighter-armed opponents, found themselves at a disadvantage. Their wicker shields and lack of heavy armor were no match for Greek spears and discipline. And here's the kicker. Mardonius himself was killed in the fray, reportedly struck down by a thrown rock or javelin, depending on which ancient source you want to believe. His death threw the Persian ranks into chaos, leading to a decisive Greek victory. The Persians, now leaderless, turned tail and fled, leaving behind their camp, their riches, and any hopes of conquering Greece. The aftermath of Plataea was a turning point. The Greeks had shown that they could not only stand up to the might of Persia, but also send them packing. The threat of a Persian conquest was finally over, and the Greeks could breathe a collective sigh of relief. But let's not romanticize it too much. This wasn't just about liberty and glory. It was also about realpolitik and survival. The Greek city-states, ever pragmatic, were quick to capitalize on their victory. Athens, in particular, saw an opportunity to expand its influence. With the Persian threat gone, they didn't waste time in establishing what would become the Delian League, a coalition of city-states ostensibly formed to keep the Persians at bay, but in reality, a vehicle for Athenian dominance. The League's treasury was kept on the island of Delos, a nice neutral spot, until Athens decided it was safer in their own backyard. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just about safety, it was about power and control. The economic implications were huge. The tribute paid by League members filled Athenian coffers, funding the construction of the Parthenon and other grand projects that would transform Athens into the cultural and political powerhouse of the ancient world. The city-state that had once been on the brink of destruction was now riding a wave of prosperity and influence. Politically, the Persian Wars had a unifying effect, albeit temporary, on the Greek world. For a brief moment, the city-states put aside their rivalries to face a common enemy, but this newfound unity was as fragile as a Spartan's patience for Athenian rhetoric. The seeds of future conflict, especially between Athens and Sparta, were already being sown. The Peloponnesian War loomed on the horizon, ready to tear apart the delicate fabric of Greek unity. And what about democracy, you ask? Well, the wars, particularly the naval victories, played a significant role in shaping Athenian democracy. The rowers of the triremes were largely from the lower classes, and their essential contribution to the war effort gave them a stronger voice in politics. It was a shift that saw Athens moving toward a more inclusive form of democracy, where even the poorest citizens had a say in the city's affairs. It was far from perfect, but it was a step forward in the grand experiment of governance by the people. But let's not forget the spin doctors, those ancient propagandists who knew how to turn a phrase and a victory into a legend. The Athenians were masters of PR, crafting narratives that elevated their struggles and triumphs into epic tales of heroism and divine favor. Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, Plataea, each became more than just battles. They were woven into the cultural fabric, inspiring generation after generation. In the end, the Persian Wars were more than just a series of battles. They were a clash of civilizations, a contest of wills that shaped the course of history. They were the ancient equivalent of a blockbuster franchise, complete with unforgettable characters, epic showdowns, and a legacy that would echo through the ages. Greeks had faced the mightiest empire of their time and emerged victorious, setting the stage for the golden age of Athens. The wars had tested their mettle, forged alliances, and transformed the Greek world in ways that would resonate far beyond their own shores. So, as you stroll through the agora, perhaps clutching that amphora of celebratory wine, you can't help but reflect on how history has unfolded around you. The Persian Wars may be over, but the stories, the myths, and the lessons they impart remain very much alive, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of a people determined to shape their own destiny. And as you raise your cup to the memory of those who fought and those who spun their tales, you realize that the legacy of these wars is more than just a chapter in a history book. It's a living, breathing narrative that continues to inspire and challenge us to this day. Winston Churchill entered the world in a blaze of aristocratic eccentricity on November 30, 1874, at Blenheim Palace, a place so grand it makes your average manor look like a garden shed. His family was the British equivalent of reality TV royalty. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, a fiery politician with a knack for making enemies, and his mother, Jenny Jerome, an American heiress with a flair for drama and pearls. The Churchills were a family that practically invented the concept of eccentric charm, setting the stage for Winston's own brand of larger-than-life leadership. Now, let's not pretend Winston's childhood was all afternoon tea and cricket. The young Churchill was more likely to be found in the naughty corner than the head of the class. He struggled at school, which was probably less about intellectual capacity and more about his attention being elsewhere, perhaps dreaming of leading armies or just savoring the prospect of a cigar. Yes, cigars. You see, Churchill's love affair with cigars began at the tender age of 15 when he found a stash belonging to his father. Fast forward a few decades, and he was puffing through an estimated 300,000 cigars in his lifetime. This was a man who, even in personal vice, aimed for Churchillian proportions. Churchill wasn't just about cigars. He had a taste for the finer things. Champagne, for instance. He famously claimed that a single glass of champagne lifts the spirits, and a bottle would bring joy to the soul. During his lifetime, he reportedly consumed over 42,000 bottles of Paul Roger champagne. That's not just a beverage choice, that's a commitment. His penchant for lavishness was, in part, a coping mechanism for the pressures of his early political career. A career that wasn't exactly smooth sailing at first. Ah, yes, politics. Young Winston was elected to Parliament in 1900, riding the wave of his family's name and his own undeniable charisma. But things didn't always go according to plan. Take the Gallipoli campaign of World War I, for example, which was a spectacular military disaster that could fill a whole season of how not to win a war. As First Lord of the Admiralty, Churchill thought a swift naval attack would knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. Instead, it turned into an 8-month slog, costing the Allies around 250,000 casualties without a single notable victory. The whole debacle was like trying to win a chess match by flipping the board. Yet, it's this very failure that forged Churchill's resilience. He was booted from the Admiralty, a blow that would have sent many a lesser politician sulking into obscurity. Not Winston. He just picked himself up, dusted off his bowler hat, and took a brief detour into the trenches of World War I as a battalion commander. This was a man who took learning from your mistakes to the next level by going to the front lines to see the mess firsthand. Churchill's early political career was a roller coaster of triumphs and faceplants, but it was never dull. His quick wit and sharp tongue often made headlines, though not always for the right reasons. He once famously quipped, "I am always ready to learn, although I do not always like being taught," a line that encapsulates the man's stubborn, yet open-minded, approach to life. His political journey was like a game of snakes and ladders, a climb to the top, followed by a swift fall, only to start all over again with even more determination. The myth of Churchill as the unyielding wartime leader often overlooks these early years of trial and error. His personal quirks, champagne bubbles, cigar smoke, and all, weren't just charming affectations, but integral to his identity. These quirks were the foundation for a leadership style that was both fiercely individual and uniquely effective. His early failures, particularly the Gallipoli fiasco, were not the end, but a crucible that tempered his resolve and steeled his nerves for the future battles that would define his legacy. In essence, understanding Churchill means recognizing the blend of privilege and struggle luxury and hardship that characterized his early life. He was a man of contradictions, a privileged aristocrat with democratic ideals, a strategic genius with a history of blunders, and a leader whose personal indulgences were as legendary as his oratory skills. This intricate mosaic of experiences and eccentricities set the stage for a leadership style that, despite its flaws, would one day help save a nation. So, Churchill, the man, the myth, the cigar-wielding bulldog, was a walking contradiction, a paradox in a bowler hat. But how did this roller coaster of a career land him at the helm of Britain during its darkest hour? Well, it wasn't a straight shot up the ladder, that's for sure. Let's fast forward to 1940, a year that would have given any decent horror movie a run for its money in terms of suspense and dread. Europe was a powder keg, Nazi Germany was blitzkrieging its way across the continent, and Britain was in dire need of a leader who could rally the troops, both figuratively and literally. You see, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's policy of appeasement had aged about as well as milk left out in the sun. By May 1940, it was clear that Nazi Germany wasn't particularly interested in playing nice. Chamberlain's resignation was a foregone conclusion, and the political climate was as unpredictable as a British summer. Enter Winston Churchill, stage right, cigar firmly in hand. On May 10, 1940, he became Prime Minister, a role he seemed born to play, or at least one he'd spent a lifetime preparing for, both consciously and through a series of spectacular missteps. Churchill's rise to power was less a coronation and more a scramble up a cliff face, but once he got there, he made the role his own. His first speech to the House of Commons on May 13, 1940, wasn't exactly a soothing balm for the British public's frayed nerves. Instead, he delivered the now famous blood, toil, tears, and sweat speech. Talk about setting the bar high. It was a brutal dose of reality wrapped in eloquence, a pep talk that was more about bracing for impact than promising a cushy ride. The impact of his speeches can't be overstated. They were a lifeline thrown to a nation drowning in fear. His words were like a verbal cup of strong tea, bitter, bracing, and exactly what was needed to steel the soul. And when it came to oratory, Churchill was a maestro. He had the uncanny ability to make even the bleakest scenarios sound almost noble. Take his "We Shall Fight on the Beaches" speech on June 4, 1940, delivered after the evacuation of Dunkirk. Here, Churchill turned a military retreat into a testament of British resolve, a masterclass in finding silver linings amid the storm clouds. Dunkirk, by the way, was no small feat. Over 9 days, from May 26 to June 4, 1940, a makeshift flotilla of over 800 vessels managed to rescue more than 338,000 Allied soldiers from the clutches of advancing German forces. It was a logistical miracle and a testament to human resilience, but Churchill wisely avoided sugarcoating the situation. He knew that while Dunkirk was a story of survival, it was not a victory. Hence his famous line, "Wars are not won by evacuations." Now, let's talk myths and legends. The romantic image of Churchill as the unyielding leader, unflappable and unwavering, is often painted in broad, sepia-toned strokes. But the reality wasn't quite so picture-perfect. Sure, Churchill's speeches were inspiring, but they were also carefully crafted tools of psychological warfare. He understood the power of words like a general understands artillery. They could be just as destructive or protective, depending on their use. His speeches were a rallying cry, a way to galvanize a nation into action, but they were also a strategic move to keep morale high and the enemy guessing. The myth of Churchill as a solitary savior also conveniently glosses over the collaborative nature of his leadership. While he was undoubtedly the face of British resolve, he was backed by a team of dedicated and equally resilient individuals who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The War Cabinet, a motley crew of political figures and military experts, was instrumental in shaping wartime strategy. Churchill may have been the conductor, but the orchestra played a crucial role in the symphony of war governance. Let's not forget the economic backdrop against which all this drama unfolded. Britain's war effort wasn't just fueled by Churchill's rhetoric. It was underpinned by a staggering mobilization of resources. The costs were astronomical. By the end of the war, Britain's national debt had ballooned to over 200% of GDP, a financial hangover that would take decades to shake off. Rationing became the norm, and the British people adopted a make, do, and mend mentality, recycling everything from clothing to cooking grease for the war effort. The economy was a war machine, its gears greased by the sacrifices of ordinary citizens. Churchill's leadership style was a study in contrast. He was both a micromanager and a delegator, a man who could switch from grand strategy to nitty-gritty details with the flick of a cigar ash. His infamous Action This Day labels were a testament to his sense of urgency, a polite yet pointed reminder that Britain was in a race against time. In many ways, he was the embodiment of British wartime spirit, stubborn, resourceful, and not averse to a stiff drink at the end of a long day. But let's not get too carried away on the wings of nostalgia. The reality of Churchill's leadership was also tinged with controversy. His dogged determination sometimes bordered on obstinacy, and he was known for his fiery temper and occasional lapses in judgment. His relationship with his generals was often fraught with tension as he pushed for bold, sometimes reckless military maneuvers. The Norway campaign, for example, was a strategic blunder that nearly cost Britain dearly, yet it was overshadowed by the subsequent successes that cemented his legacy. Churchill's rise to power during World War II was a complex interplay of personal ambition, political maneuvering, and sheer historical necessity. He was a leader as flawed as he was formidable, a man whose strengths and weaknesses were two sides of the same coin. His speeches, while legendary, were not mere flights of rhetorical fancy. They were crafted with precision and purpose, designed to rally a nation on the brink. As we delve deeper into the wartime years, we'll continue to see how the myth and reality of Churchill's leadership intertwined, creating a legacy that still fascinates and challenges us today. So, grab your metaphorical bowler hat as we prepare to navigate the turbulent waters of the 1940. There's more to explore in the saga of Churchill's wartime leadership, and this is just the beginning of our journey through the history of a man who defied the odds and left an indelible mark on the world stage. If Churchill's early wartime leadership was a roller coaster, then his strategic decisions during World War II were like navigating a minefield with a blindfold on and a marching band in tow. The stakes were as high as the tension was palpable, and Churchill, with his penchant for theatrical flair, knew he was writing history with each decision. His strategic gambles were not just about outsmarting the enemy, but also keeping his allies close, and occasionally at bay. First on the agenda, the Dunkirk evacuation. Now, if you think this was a straightforward, let's get the lads home operation, you'd be wrong. The Brits had to pull off a logistical Houdini act to rescue those 338,000 soldiers. Dunkirk was a masterclass in resourcefulness, an event that transformed fishing boats and leisure vessels into lifeboats of history. But don't let the heroic imagery fool you. It was as much about survival as it was strategy. Churchill was acutely aware that a large-scale evacuation could be seen as a defeat, which is why he spun it as a miracle of deliverance. It was all about crafting the narrative, making the bitter pill of retreat a little more palatable. But Dunkirk was just the opening act. The real performance involved navigating the treacherous waters of international alliances. Here enters Franklin D. Roosevelt, the U.S. president who was both an ally and a riddle wrapped in a New Deal. Churchill and FDR's relationship was the stuff of strategic romance legend, but it was far from love at first sight. Roosevelt was initially cautious, aware that America's entry into the war wasn't exactly a popular idea back home. U.S. public opinion was like a cat on a hot tin roof, nervous and ready to leap at the slightest provocation. Churchill knew he needed the U.S. on board, and he played the long game. His correspondence with FDR was a mix of charm, wit, and a subtle nudge here and there. It was like a geopolitical chess match, and Churchill was determined not to end up in checkmate. One of his first moves was the Lend-Lease Act, a financial lifeline cast across the Atlantic. By March 1941, Britain was effectively broke, and the Lend-Lease Act was the economic equivalent of borrowing a cup of sugar, a $31 billion cup of sugar at that. This wasn't just about dollars and cents. It was about ensuring Britain's survival against the Axis powers. Now, let's have a chuckle over one of Churchill's classic interactions with FDR. The story goes that during one of their marathon discussions, Churchill emerged from the bath wrapped in nothing but his dignity. When informed that FDR was on the line, he reportedly quipped, "Tell him I have nothing to hide." The man had a way with words, and evidently with towels. Strategic decisions weren't just about alliances. They were about choosing battlefields wisely. Take the North African campaign, a theater of war that was as much about sand dunes and sunburns as it was about military tactics. Churchill was adamant that the Mediterranean was the soft underbelly of Europe, a phrase that sounds more like a culinary critique than a military strategy. Yet, it was a bold move that paid off, culminating in the defeat of Rommel's Afrika Korps in 1943. The victory was a morale booster and a reminder that the Allies could, indeed, turn the tide. Of course, not all of Churchill's decisions were dazzling successes. The deep raid of 1942 was a disaster that made the Gallipoli campaign look like a dry run. Intended as a reconnaissance mission and a morale booster, it turned into a bloodbath with nearly 60% of the 6,000-strong Allied force either killed, wounded, or captured. Churchill's critics were quick to pounce, but he weathered the storm, ever resilient and ready with a new plan or a comforting word. Failure, after all, was just an opportunity in disguise. Then there was the delicate matter of Soviet relations. Enter Joseph Stalin, the man with a mustache as formidable as his political maneuvers. Churchill and Stalin's alliance was one of necessity rather than affection. The Tehran Conference of 1943 was their first face-to-face meeting, where the setting was more like a geopolitical circus than a diplomatic tea party. Churchill had to balance charm and caution, knowing Stalin was as much a partner as a potential adversary. Churchill's charm offensive extended beyond political leaders. He had a knack for winning over skeptics with his oratory brilliance. His speeches weren't just words. They were rallying cries that echoed across the airwaves and into the hearts of millions. The finest hour speech of June 18, 1940, was a masterstroke, designed to galvanize a weary nation and remind them that the fight was far from over. It was Churchill at his best, a reminder that words could be as powerful as any tank or battleship. But let's not kid ourselves. The man was not infallible. His strategic decisions were sometimes as unpredictable as the weather in London. The decision to bomb Dresden in February 1945 remains one of the most controversial of the war. The city was reduced to rubble, with estimates of civilian casualties ranging from 22,000 to 25,000. Critics argued it was unnecessary, a show of brute force when victory was already on the horizon. It was a stark reminder that the line between strategic genius and military overreach was perilously thin. Churchill's leadership was a balancing act, a high-wire performance where the stakes were nothing less than the future of Western civilization. Yet, he wasn't alone on this tightrope. Figures like General Alan Brooke, chief of the Imperial General Staff, were instrumental in shaping military strategy. Brooke often clashed with Churchill, their disagreements like a tactical tug-of-war. But it was precisely this tension that honed their strategies, ensuring that decisions were robust and well considered. Economically, Britain was walking a fiscal tightrope of its own. The war effort was bleeding the treasury dry, and rationing became not just a necessity, but a way of life. From 1940 onwards, everything from meat to clothing was rationed, with the average weekly meat ration amounting to a paltry 100 grams per person. The make, do, and mend mantra wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was a survival strategy that kept the home front resilient amidst adversity. So, as we delve deeper into Churchill's wartime leadership, let's remember that it was as much about guts and grit as it was about grand strategy. This was a leader whose decisions shaped the course of history, yet they were made under the relentless pressure of war. The myth of Churchill as the unyielding leader is compelling, but the reality is far more nuanced. It's a story of alliances forged and broken, of gambles taken and lessons learned. And as we continue this journey through the wartime years, we'll uncover more layers of the man behind the myth, a leader for whom the stakes were nothing short of world-changing. Stay tuned as we explore the next chapters in Churchill's saga, where the drama, intrigue, and yes, a touch of humor continue to unfold. As Churchill navigated the high-wire act of wartime leadership, he was also juggling the not-so-glamorous realities of life at home. Picture Britain as a beleaguered ship in a storm, its hull battered by relentless waves of economic strain and social unrest. The myth of a united home front, a harmonious chorus of keep calm and carry on, was more wishful thinking than reality. Behind the stiff upper lips and ration books lay a simmering cauldron of class tensions and public dissent. Let's start with everyone's favorite wartime pastime, rationing. If you thought the British were all happily queuing for a slice of Spam pie, think again. Rationing wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a daily reminder that the war was as much about endurance as it was about victory. By 1942, pretty much everything that could be rationed was, from meat to clothing to the very shoes on your feet. Imagine trying to get by on 600 calories a day when the War Office deemed even jam a luxury. The Ministry of Food's slogan might as well have been, "Jam today, gone tomorrow." But rationing wasn't just about tightening belts. It was a great social leveler, or so the government hoped. In reality, it exposed and exacerbated existing class divisions. The affluent could still access black market luxuries, while the working class made do with powdered eggs and ersatz coffee. Churchill's government tried to paint a rosy picture of shared sacrifice, but the truth was a bit more Dickensian. The shortages bred resentment, and the black market thrived like weeds in a victory garden. So much for unity. Then there was the Blitz, that infamous aerial bombardment that turned London into a dystopian landscape of rubble and resolve. From September 1940 to May 1941, the Luftwaffe dropped approximately 18,000 tons of bombs on Britain, with London bearing the brunt. The Blitz wasn't just a military campaign. It was psychological warfare designed to break British spirit. And while the official narrative is one of defiant resilience, there was also fear, chaos, and the harsh reality of life in air raid shelters. Churchill's response to the Blitz was a masterclass in morale boosting, or at least an attempt at it. His visits to bombed-out areas, cigar in hand, were as much about optics as empathy. The sight of the Prime Minister standing amid the wreckage, unbowed and unbroken, was meant to rally the public. Yet the reality was far grimmer. The romantic image of Londoners cheerfully singing in the underground shelters is mostly myth. The shelters were overcrowded, unsanitary, and often more terrifying than the bombings themselves. The government even had to ban unofficial shelters in the London underground initially, worried they would breed defeatism. But Churchill, ever the wordsmith, knew that winning the war of words was just as crucial as any military victory. His speeches during the Blitz were like verbal sandbags against a tide of despair. "We shall never surrender," he proclaimed, a phrase that was as much a command as it was a promise. Yet, not everyone bought into the rhetoric. Public dissent simmered beneath the surface, with some even calling for peace negotiations as the bombs fell. The call for an armistice was a whisper in the corridors of power, a reminder that not everyone shared Churchill's resolve to fight to the bitter end. Economic pressure was another front in this war at home. By 1945, Britain's national debt had ballooned to a staggering £21 billion, a figure that would make even the most reckless modern-day spenders blush. Financing the war effort was like trying to fill a bottomless pit, and the government had to resort to war bonds and increased taxation, squeezing the populace for every penny. The austerity measures were a bitter pill, and not everyone swallowed it willingly. Then there was the issue of labour. The war effort required an army of workers, and with men off fighting, women were called to fill the gap. The image of Rosie the Riveter in her overalls may seem empowering, but for many women it was a double-edged sword. They were expected to juggle factory work and domestic duties, often for lower wages than their male counterparts. This shift in gender roles was revolutionary, but it also sowed seeds of discontent. The post-war period promised a return to normalcy, but for many women there was no going back. Churchill's leadership during these domestic challenges was a mixed bag. His attempts to boost morale were admirable, but they often glossed over the harsh realities of wartime life. He was a master of rhetoric, yet the slogans and speeches couldn't fill empty stomachs or rebuild bombed-out homes. His focus was unwaveringly on the bigger picture, defeating Hitler, but sometimes at the expense of the smaller, yet crucial, battles on the home front. The so-called home front was a battleground of its own, fraught with the same complexities and contradictions that defined Churchill's leadership. It was a reminder that victory abroad was only possible with resilience at home. As we delve further into Churchill's wartime saga, we'll continue to explore the delicate dance of leadership, and the often overlooked stories of those who lived through the era. Stay with me as we untangle the threads of myth and reality, revealing the tapestry of history that shaped a nation and a leader alike. Churchill's wartime leadership was a high-stakes balancing act, but when the guns fell silent in 1945, the real test of his legacy began. The man who had become a symbol of British defiance and resilience found himself at a crossroads. If his wartime leadership was a symphony of bold decisions and stirring speeches, then the post-war period was more like a jarring reprise that left much of the audience confused and some downright dissatisfied. Let's dive into the 1945 general election, where Churchill went from hero to zero faster than you can say, landslide defeat. After leading Britain through the war, Churchill and his Conservative Party were shown the door in favour of Clement Attlee and the Labour Party. Labour secured a whopping 393 seats to the Conservatives' 197, a political smackdown of epic proportions. Churchill, who had been riding high on the waves of wartime victory, suddenly found himself washed up on the shores of peacetime politics. The reasons for this dramatic shift were as nuanced as Churchill himself. First off, the British public was ready for change. After 6 years of war and a decade of economic turmoil, they were desperate for a future that promised more than just survival. Attlee's Labour Party offered a vision of post-war reconstruction that resonated with the electorate: nationalisation of key industries, the creation of the National Health Service, and a welfare state that promised security from cradle to grave. It was a siren call for a weary nation looking to rebuild, and one that Churchill's more conservative, laissez-faire policies couldn't quite match. But it wasn't just about policy. Churchill's wartime persona, though legendary, wasn't necessarily what people wanted in a peacetime leader. His focus on military matters and his reluctance to embrace domestic reforms left him looking like a relic from a bygone era. The public wanted someone who could navigate the complexities of peace, not just the chaos of war. And let's face it, Churchill's penchant for bombastic oratory and strategic bravado didn't exactly scream domestic tranquility. Economically, Britain was a mess. The war had left the nation financially crippled, with debt levels exceeding 200% of GDP and a host of social issues bubbling beneath the surface. The cost of rebuilding was staggering, and the public was acutely aware of the sacrifices that lay ahead. Labour's promise of a fairer, more equitable society was a beacon of hope amid the economic rubble. Churchill's Conservatives couldn't shake the image of being the party of privilege, an association that was about as appealing as a cold cup of wartime tea. The myth of Churchill as the unassailable leader took a hit as well. His wartime successes were undeniable, but his stubbornness and occasional missteps were fresh in the public's mind. The controversial bombing of Dresden, for instance, had raised uncomfortable questions about the morality of his decisions. In the cold light of peace, the nuances of his wartime strategies were subject to scrutiny, and not all of them emerged unscathed. After his electoral defeat, Churchill didn't exactly retreat into obscurity, though. True to form, he remained a vocal and influential figure, offering his thoughts, solicited or otherwise, on the unfolding geopolitical landscape. He famously coined the term Iron Curtain during a speech in Missouri in 1946, a phrase that painted a vivid picture of the ideological divide in post-war Europe. Churchill's warning about the growing Soviet influence was prophetic, but it wasn't enough to restore his political fortunes just yet. However, the 1951 general election saw the political pendulum swing back in his favour. After 6 years in the wilderness, Churchill returned as Prime Minister, albeit a more subdued version of his wartime self. His second term was marked by a focus on foreign policy and a cautious approach to domestic issues. No longer the firebrand of old, Churchill's leadership was reminiscent of a veteran captain steering a ship through calmer waters, with an eye on maintaining stability rather than seeking dramatic change. But let's not kid ourselves. Churchill's health was on a decline. By the early 1950, the once indomitable leader was a shadow of his former self. A series of strokes in 1953 left him physically weakened, though still mentally sharp. His second stint as Prime Minister was characterized by a gradual transition of power, culminating in his final resignation in 1955. The man who had been at the helm during Britain's finest hour was stepping down, not with a bang, but with a dignified, if slightly weary, farewell. Churchill's legacy is a tapestry of contradictions, woven from threads of triumph and controversy. He is celebrated as the bulldog who stood firm against tyranny, yet critiqued for his imperialist views and stubbornness. His speeches remain iconic, yet his policies are dissected with the benefit of hindsight. The romantic image of Churchill as the ultimate wartime leader often overshadows the complexities of his character, an intricate blend of brilliance, bravado, and occasionally blunder. In modern times, Churchill's legacy continues to provoke debate. He is both lionized and scrutinized, his actions examined through the lens of contemporary values. His leadership during the war is undeniably a defining chapter in British history, yet his peacetime record invites a more nuanced appraisal. He was a man of his time, flawed, formidable, and fascinatingly complex. To sum it all up, Churchill was the right man for a very specific moment in history, a leader whose legacy is as complicated as the era he helped to shape. He was a titan of contradiction, a statesman whose life was a series of peaks and valleys as dramatic as the events he influenced. As history marches on, Churchill remains a figure of both admiration and inquiry, a testament to the enduring complexities of human leadership. So, as we close the book on this chapter of history, let's raise a metaphorical glass of Pall Roger champagne to Winston Churchill, a man whose life was as rich and effervescent as the legacy he left behind.